We're good.
Yay! You know what happens when you drop the computer, which I did just before we went live?
I was going to say, everyone missed an amazing moment.
That was great. Yeah.
It was good. I got to see your shoes, which was cool. Well,
oh, right. These fabulous slippers.
I was jealous. They look very comfortable.
They're okay. I mean, all the fur is worn off, but apart from that,
I think the chat does know who you are. Some are saying you're the greatest author of all time, and I think that would be pretty on brand. But I want to introduce everyone to the author of Malazan Book of the Fall. Among other things, he's written a first contact science fiction novel as well called Rejoice, which I think sounds very interesting, by the way, and I want to ask you about it. But my guest tonight is Steven Erikson. Steven, how are you?
Hi, everyone. I don't have the comments on the side, so the ones you call up are the ones I'm going to see.
Yes.
So the pressure's all on you, Jimmy.
Yes, I have to be a good curator of comments and to get to everything. And I know there's a lot of people that were really excited for you to come on, but none of them were as excited as me. So I was telling you before we went live that I feel like I've already had a conversation with you based on all the interviews and stuff that I've seen and I've read and I've studied up on. And one thing I've noticed about you, man, is like you're so open for dialogue.
I love it. Yeah. The more we can talk about writing, just in general, the happier I am. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's awesome because that communication pipeline is not there with a lot of authors, and that's fine. Like that's a personal preference, right? Some people don't want to engage in that, or they like to keep the veil up a little bit. But just speaking from someone who makes content and talks to people, I really appreciate it. I appreciate that you do these type of things.
No, it's fun as well, and I have sat on panels and stuff where other authors would sort of, like you say, raise the veil of mystery.
Yeah.
On the whole process of writing, and I'm the complete opposite. I'd rather expose all the details of the process of writing, because I guess there's a part of me that wants to teach and hasn't really done a lot of that, and just to somehow convey the enthusiasm that I have regarding just storytelling and the ways in which we can do that. So I definitely want to talk to you about you mentioning that you are working on stories, and so let's go there.
Let's do it. I mean, one of the things that I think I respect the most about you and most about Malazan in general is the fact that you're very uncompromising. And I feel like you have a vision and you do that vision and you do it your way. And that's something coming from wrestling, right? Coming from a pro wrestling background, I was told to compromise a lot on the way I did things, but I had very good information. I was very fortunate to be in contact with people who made it very far in that business. And I knew to kind of drown out the rest. And I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew I was on the right track to do something. And I got a lot of awesome opportunities that way. So I feel like I kind of relate with you in a way. Obviously, it's a different way of telling stories, right? But I never compromised.
Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know how. I know AP and Kahneman and I have talked at length about this because, often AP says to me, well, you can write a bestseller if you want to write the bestseller, but you're not going to enjoy writing it. And maybe he has a point there. I really feel that I need to be very much challenged about what I'm working on. It needs to test my limits. And that's just part of it. And, when you do things like moving into sort of deep characterization, one wants to find that to be a different place, an unfamiliar place. Because if all the characters that you write are familiar in the sense that they share your worldview, then you're not challenging yourself at all.
Yeah.
So to raise up characters and to explore characters who think completely differently is actually part of the reward process that I get for writing.
Yeah, I really like that actually, and thinking about getting in other people's heads. And I think that's probably more important than ever right now in the world. There is a lot of echo chambers out there. And there's a lot of not being able to see the other person's side, no matter how wrong we think they are. And what that does, I think, is not only open up your mind to dialogue inside of your own head, but maybe being able to step out of your shoes and see things from a different perspective, and different perspective means everything. And that's something you do in your books. You make events mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
And the truth of those events. And I absolutely love your characterization. And that was the biggest misconception I had going into Malazan. The things I had seen said, oh, the characterization's different. You may not get behind the characters as much. And I don't agree with that at all. I have gotten so hard behind Tattersail in book 1. I mean, this is going to be no spoilers, folks, so don't worry. You don't have to click off or anything. But just for an example, Tattersail in book 1, I was immediately attached. And it's not so much that the characterization is different. It's different than a lot of other things I've read, but it's good. Like, it's really, really good.
Well, it's almost like shorthand for character. Because I learned as a short story writer that, I applied it to novels, not knowing any better. And so that's just how I approached the novels as well, that the lines have to be important and they have to convey a lot of information. And some of that information is not on the surface at all. In fact, some of that information may be going in the opposite direction to what you're seeing on the surface. And for me, that's just a blast. It's where the process of writing becomes so much fun, where you know that you're layering things and you're setting things up for much further down the road. And that's part of the challenge, I think.
Yeah, I read today that it took you 8 years to get Gardens of the Moon published, and that by
too complicated, too complicated, and too many characters.
Was that the complaint?
Yeah.
How interesting. Obviously, you threw us in the deep end. But as someone who did just read Dune, I know you said in an interview that you lifted Dune, and then you kind of took that structure and put it in fantasy.
Yeah, I lifted the structure. Not much else from Dune, but I certainly lifted the structure.
Right.
The epigraphs, that sort of perspective of historical analysis, looking back on events. I took all that, absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was great.
And it's interesting, just because you switched to fantasy, that apparently that structure is confusing for people. Like, I find that it's an interesting distinction between sci-fi and fantasy. And I saw a quote where you said that you feel like sci-fi is very much about ideas. And I was wondering, are there any other is there any fantasy that you feel like are about ideas, or maybe why isn't a lot of fantasy more about ideas?
There's plenty of, I'm thinking actually more sword and sorcery, which is, an offshoot of epic fantasy. And it's about historicity, I think. It's about history in the sense of story set within a created world that is itself a commentary on our world. So I'm thinking Robert E. Howard's, Conan stories. You wouldn't think that there was a lot going on there, but he does have a framework. He created maps of, I guess pre Ice Age Europe and North Africa or whatever, right? So it's as if, before the Great Flood, as it were. And that way he was commenting on the persistence of cultures and civilizations and how they rise and fall. And these are the civilizations that fell, but then rose again in a new recognizable form that we recognize as our history. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, I love that. I like falling civilizations and the rebuilding of those. I saw someone say I learned as a short story writer on the Erikson bingo, and I think I was surprised when I heard that. And knowing that you came from, I believe, is the Iowa Writers Workshop. Is that correct? Yeah,
well, my undergraduate was here in Victoria, University of Victoria, and ironically, I think I learned more in the undergraduate than I did in the Iowa Writers Workshop. At the time, the Writers Workshop was very much everyone trying to write like Raymond Carver, and unfortunately, most writers at the time there did not have the life experience of Raymond Carver. So a lot of what I was reading was very much a kind of affectation of the style of Carver.
Yeah.
So very minimalist, quite glib in a sense, that the language was just something you'd skipped over, and it wasn't really emphasized. And certainly nothing in the way of heavy plotting of stories. And so I was sort of really swimming against the stream when I was at Iowa. But it was 2 more years in which to write, and that was more, valuable than anything else.
Yeah. So you're writing like short stories, and,
Yeah.
and you're writing. How do you become this epic fantasy, I mean, massive fantasy writer? So, and I know that the way your books are structured, it does feel like short stories, like
They are.
within this big tale. But like, when did you go, oh, I have something here, like, let's go this route? Like,
Well, that was mostly a product of the gaming I did with Eslamont, with Cam. We built this very extensive backstory, and through the gaming we played out countless characters, and their lives sort of took shape in the process of the gaming. So all of that was sort of sitting there, and it felt like such a waste that it was just going to be ending up in the form of rotting pieces of paper with coffee stains on them, and illegible note taking and all the rest, stuck in a cardboard box somewhere in the attic. It seemed that it felt like it would have been, for both Cam and I, a bit of a waste to just sort of let that, be part of our protracted adolescence in our 20s, when we were, living and going and taking writing courses and doing archaeology or whatever. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus for all of that. And so the irony was, even when we sat down to write the film script of Gardens of the Moon, it never even occurred to us that we were starting so late in the story, that we had all this stuff that came before. I mean, we even had a campaign that moved a couple of characters back in time to the Bronze Age, for the Malazan world, where I redrew the maps, with different coastlines and all the rest.
Yeah.
So we just had an immense amount of material, but then we set everything into Rujistan, which came late in our gaming. So even then, I guess we just sort of relied on the backstory, but were not particularly compelled to start at the beginning.
Right. Which is one of the fun things I think about Malazan. It's like you're learning it's being told as a history, but you're also still learning about the history that does legitimately feel thousands of years old.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure both Cam and I, age tremendously in one night of gaming every now and then. So, yeah.
You said the magic word, which is Bronze Age. We were talking before we went live, and I was saying how much of a big fan I am about the fall of civilization, the Bronze Age collapse. So I would be very interested if you would write the Bronze Age of Malazan. I would love to read that.
Man, all I've got left of that stuff are the maps. In fact, I think it's only one map. It's one Bronze Age map of Kwantali, so the original continent that our gaming started out on.
I would love to see that. That would be,
yeah, it's kicking around somewhere.
So you wrote these short stories, and then you're turning into something more. You have all this world building and stuff. Is there something that you could point to say this is a good way to prepare to write something this massive? Because with me, I write short stories. I would like to write something bigger, but it is very intimidating thinking about creating an alternate world, and on top of that, going epic.
Right. I suppose everything is character driven. At least that's you learn that as a short story writer. So you're taking your workshops and you're reading a lot, and it's all character driven. But the narrative for a character's life is episodic. I mean, that's how we exist. I mean, if we look
Yeah.
back on it, and we see our own history as quite episodic. So if you can view your exploration of characters in an episodic fashion and simply link them together, one after another, you'll get your big stories. So a lot depends on where your characters are coming from. And one of the things that I remember, and you still read it, and people still talk about it when they talk about writing on YouTube or whatever, in terms of giving advice to writers, which is, it's a statement, something along the lines of write what you know. And quite often, I think that advice is actually either misdirected or misunderstood or misapplied. Because if you think of it in literal terms of writing what you know, well, if you're a plumber, then you write about plumbing, right? And that's pretty limiting, if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
But writing about what you know is actually thinking of your life experience, wherever you are in your age, and all the things you've done or haven't done, doesn't matter. But whatever is there is actually your library. It's your resource. And you can take anything from there and transform it and make use of it. So, you said you were in professional wrestling. So it occurs to me that in terms of characters, you can just remember back to a dressing room, where a half dozen other wrestlers are, either getting out of their gear or getting into their gear, or, groaning about their bruises and all the rest. And you can take, elements of their characteristics, their behaviors, their speech patterns, their physicality, all of these things, and pluck them and stick them down in a fantasy setting and turn, your 5 favorite wrestlers from those dressing rooms into a squad of soldiers traveling across the country.
Yeah.
And so once you've done that, you're actually writing about what you know, because you know these people. You've experienced life with them. And now you're throwing them into a completely new scenario, a new situation, and you're just following along. And so it is very, it can be intimidating if you're thinking, well, what kind of characters can I create? Say I'm 20 years old, I've just started writing or whatever. You've got an endless supply, because everything you've lived through is your source material. And all it takes is the imagination to take elements from that source material and transpose it, and sometimes mix it up. So for me, I read a lot of war fiction, war literature, from all 3 of the major wars. And so I was basically rifling through somebody else's, library of experiences.
Yeah.
And basically ripping off whatever I could. But that by itself probably would not be as successful if not for the archaeology digs that I've worked on in really remote places and wild places where, you're crammed together with 5 or 6 other people, and you're in the bush, and it's rough. It's a lot of hardship and isolation. And so that stuff is I take that, and then I take all that Vietnam War stuff and war literature, mash it all together, and that creates the Malazan Marines. And it was the same for Cam, because he was on digs as well. So we often were on the same dig, so we'd be sharing those experiences. And so there's a lot of dig reference inside jokes going on in our fiction that only he and I actually know about. So.
Well, that's definitely a unique experience for you, considering that, being a co-author in this big world, that has to be such a bonding experience.
Yeah, it is. And we've never had problems with it. We've never had arguments about stuff.
That's awesome.
We're just, and whenever we meet up, and, he's living now in Fairbanks in Alaska. So we don't meet up that often. And with COVID, we haven't met up at all. But as soon as we get together, we're just sort of back in that mindset and perfectly
Yeah.
relaxed and comfortable, and talking story, and what he's working on next and where he's going to take it and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
we fire each other up a lot when we get together.
That's awesome. I mean, and that chemistry doesn't exist in every friendship either, right?
No,
So the
no.
fact that you really kind of caught lightning in a bottle. I know a lot of good dudes in wrestling that I could not work with to save our lives. We just always had rotten matches. We're never happy with the final product. But then sometimes you get magic. And
yeah, but at the same time, take some of those people and start writing from their point of view.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Because then you're creating aspects of conflict within the group. And it's always, it's one of the things that I found frustrating. For example, I'm going to go way offline here, but
let's go.
About Star Trek: The Next Generation was that everybody on the crew got along with each other far too well. And you go back to the original series, and you had arguments between Spock and McCoy. You had arguments between Spock and Kirk, and they were valid arguments, and they presented, different ways of viewing, whatever it is they were going through. So some friction in whatever group you're writing about, I think is going to be the most fascinating aspects of it.
Yeah.
So these people you can't work with, and nothing ever worked on, in the arena or whatever. They will be very interesting, in the group that you create fictionally.
Yeah, and I've met some characters, let me tell you.
Yeah, I bet you have. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I do feel like that does have an impact on some of the people that I write into my stories, because I have traveled a ton, and I've been in the smallest towns in America, and I've been in some of the biggest, and I've seen all different types of people and of states and towns and everything in between. And sometimes the people that you meet in those situations are actually larger than life. Like, they're bigger than fiction. And I've definitely tried to lean into that a little bit, but I've never thought about it quite the way you put it. And I was actually thinking about it today. I was like, if I really wanted to write a story, I could write a story about a wrestler within a fantasy world, but that doesn't like get me going. But thinking of it the way you just stated it, kind of transposing that interests me. That sounds like something I could do.
Yeah. I mean, people, we talk about verisimilitude in a fantasy setting, a secondary world. Those details that feel authentic and real, and sort of help anchor and ground the reader in that world. Well, all of that stuff is what comes from that personal library of experience. So in that sense, if you were to write a scene of somebody walking on the moon of Io, well, none of us have ever done that. So what do? Well, if you've ever walked on a frozen lake in the winter, then you take the details that you remember from that experience, things like the crunch of the snow underfoot, maybe even the sound of the winds, and of course you'd have to mute that because you're dealing with Io, a small moonlet of Jupiter with almost no gravity, and probably even more gravity coming from Jupiter over your head. And transmission of sound would be different through your spacesuit or whatever. But you'd still have elements of it that you could actually take from your memory of walking across that frozen lake and stick it into that setting, and it will add verisimilitude to that moment and sort of bring life to that setting.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I've always said, and I've always used sci-fi as an example, is like the best sci-fi takes all this futuristic stuff or big ideas, and they tie it back to the human condition.
Yeah.
And they tie it back to human relationships. I think The Expanse does that like extraordinarily well. I also think it helps that it's only a little bit into the future, really. Like, I could see that happening, which is cool.
Yeah. The Expanse handles the physics of spaceflight really well.
It's so good. It's so good. I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
I like also talking about like conflict within groups and such, and it kind of lends itself to this question that Rhythma asked, which Rhythma has made some phenomenal Malazan content. Folks, if you're watching this and you haven't seen some of her Fellison essay, I thought was phenomenal. Go check that out. But she said, I just started Midnight Tides, and I was wondering if the trio of brothers was inspired by the trio of brothers in Farseer.
I don't remember the trio of brothers from Farseer.
Yeah, I
Great.
think she's referring
So,
to Verity and a bunch of people like.
so if there was inspiration, it would have been subconscious. I'm not conscious of it.
Mhm.
And that's why I always, I'll throw in that caveat, because subconsciously, who knows what's going on? Who knows
Yeah.
what internal thieving is occurring with everything you're reading or experiencing. So I can't make the claim that that there was no influence,
Right.
but not consciously. No.
And I know that I've heard you say before that you actually don't read a lot of fantasy because you don't want osmosis happening. You don't want, subconscious influences in your writing.
While I was writing, especially,
Mhm.
I realized that I had a growing aversion to picking up a fantasy novel for that reason.
Mhm.
And now I primarily read science fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah. I was that way with wrestling, actually. I wouldn't watch anyone else. I wouldn't watch other
Yeah,
wrestling because I never wanted anyone to think that I was taking something or subconsciously,
yeah,
taking something. I do the book reviews too, actually, which is why when you finish a Malazan book, it's like the best feeling ever because you unlock all this AP and Philip Chase content and Andy Smith
yeah,
content, and you're like,
yeah.
I can finally watch this stuff. So I have to read the book and publish my video, and then I will go seek out their talks with you, or just in general, even like going and reading the wiki about some stuff is so rewarding.
Hmm.
Obviously, also the big high of finishing those thick books that you
Yeah,
write.
yeah.
But I know you don't read a lot of fantasy, but the way this conversation came up, I thought was kind of funny and embarrassing for me, but I'm going to tell the story. I had done a chat with Iskar, which if you haven't checked that out, definitely check it out. It's really good. It was 2 episodes ago. Iskar's a great guy. And I get a comment from Steve, and I'm like, they said, if you ever want to shoot the shit, let me know. And I said, well, that's a nice random commenter, just wishing, they want to come talk. That's cool, and said,
Yeah.
Robin Hobb is great, by the way. And I said, I love Robin Hobb. Didn't think anything more of it. And then I got a message on Twitter from a listener. I actually don't even know who they are. And they said, did you big league Erikson? And I said, what? And they said, he commented on your video and said he would come on, and you kind of shrugged it off. And I was like, no, I didn't. And then I realized, because I'm an idiot, that it was you. And I was so embarrassed. And then I comment back, and I'm like, that's not enough. And I'm like, I'll talk to Philip. And I talked to Philip, who then, passed on my apology to you. And then we got in contact. So that's kind of a funny origin story of how this all came to be.
Right. Yeah. No, I watched you with Iskar Jurak. That was great.
I appreciate
Really
that.
good conversation.
Iskar is phenomenal. And
yeah, he is.
And being able to rant about Robin Hobb with people is like one of my favorite pastimes because I read all of her books this year, which is crazy. I tackled 16 of her books, and now I'm reading Malazan, and it's like I really outdid myself this year. And then hearing you praise her is like, it's almost validating in a way because I've just fallen in love with her writing so much.
Oh, she's a great writer. When I was teaching some workshop stuff, I actually used. I think almost the full first chapter of Assassin's Apprentice to discuss and analyze point of view control, because her point of view control in that opening section is just breathtaking.
Yeah.
Because you don't even realize that the relationship, and this is a bit spoilery, but I won't go too far, but you don't realize that the relationship between the boy and his dog is not a natural one. It just slides in there. It's just
so
perfectly. It seems perfectly normal all the way until that that one fantastic moment when the whole thing's torn apart. And I was absolutely amazed when I got to that section. And I remember going back and saying basically to myself, "How did she do that?" And then starting to deconstruct. And it's just there's a grace to her writing abilities that makes it seem effortless, but I know it's not effortless. It's
of course
very deliberate. It's very intentional. It's just so smoothly done that it's fantastic. So I use that as an example when I teach.
Yeah, I think Hobb was the first author this year, since getting back into reading as an adult, that I was like, okay, this is like, I know it's good, but I don't know why. And I wanted to know more about how she was doing what she was doing.
Yeah.
And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of talking about structure and talking about, that perspective control, right? And it was the beginnings of the wheels turning. And then I started watching AP's videos, and then I started reading Malazan, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's more to play here. And the fact that
Yeah.
you're willing to kind of show some of the craft in the process is very enlightening.
Well, point of view is everything. It is everything. And so the point of view you choose really shapes the nature of the events. And then once you've explored that, then you can switch point of views and re-examine these things from a different angle, which then muddies the waters. And I like having the water very muddy when it comes to point of view. Well, when it comes to motivation, especially amongst characters,
Yeah.
I distrust sort of simplistic reasons for people doing things. So
I would agree. I would agree with that as a reader. I've now started to catch on to that when I'm reading. I'm saying, oh, this is a little straightforward. The motivations aren't nuanced at all. And one thing that you do that I really, really like, and I wanted to ask you about it, is because Malazan is told like a history.
mm-hmm.
I love the fact that you tell it from a side character's perspective of someone like Animander Rake,
mm-hmm.
right? And because it's history, we kind of idolize these people, right? The legend of someone is bigger even than the actual perspective. And I know that you attempted to write a POV through Rake, and that you didn't. That you said it just doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Yeah.
Do you feel that way still?
Well, no. I mean, well, actually, maybe I do. Even the Animander Rake, who shows up in the Carcanis books, I don't think I actually go into that point of view. Mm-hmm. I think I keep it at arm's length. So for me, it was more once I stumbled on the realization that there are certain points of view that I simply cannot pull off. I mean, I don't have that life experience. There's no way to fake, being alive for 200,000 years. I mean, what do you do with that, right? So once I realized that, then I realized I could make use of that. And so by keeping characters at arm's length, you evoke a sense of mystery around them. And then you can use the secondary and tertiary characters who are observing that character to build on that and to build, almost a legend or a mythology around characters, but also lots of doubt and lots of uncertainty. I mean, the character of Tavor is the classic example of that.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, and so once I sort of stumbled onto the fact that it was after Gardens of the Moon came out that everybody started going on about Rake, and I was kind of bewildered. I was thinking, well, I mean, he hardly shows up. He's a character that I role played, and one of the first very characters I actually rolled up. But yeah, the excitement regarding Rake, I have to go back and look and figure, well, why is this happening? And once I realized that, then I realized that I could consciously use that for certain characters to create a certain effect. And I immediately then thought of Tavor.
It works so well. It really does. And I remember going through Gardens of the Moon and Rake being like the one, like he's what I wanted to hear more and more about. And it did dawn on me, in fact, that it was not a POV. And I was like, how interesting. And then that's when I said, this is great characterization, at least for me. Like I was like, this clicks. And I knew I was going to be in for a good time.
Well, but it's also shorthand because you're holding a point of view of another character, say Baruch, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hold that point of view, you are creating characterization for Baruch. And then Rake arrives, and now you're doing characterization for both characters from one particular point of view. And so you're doubling down. And, generally, I think the reader doesn't necessarily pick up on that because they're seeing everything through the filter of Baruch's point of view. But that filter has an effect. And it then can either elevate or diminish, the other characters' or the response to the other characters. And
Yeah.
so it's a nice way to actually cram things in there. Short story style, again, point of view, can do so much. It can do so much more work than you think. And it's not just about creating the characterization of the character whose point of view you're using. It's about creating the characters all around that character, and then their relationships, and all of that stuff can all be done just through that one point of view.
Man, I'll tell you, when you say those type of things, like talking about how much you're getting out of that one POV and how they view other people, like that's very empowering. Thinking about writing and thinking about just what I've done. And so many times it's like, okay, I'm in this character and then we're done here. Okay, let's go over here. You know what I mean? You kind of compartmentalize them. And I don't feel like I'm doing it right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I have the ability to tie these things together. But when I hear you describe it like that, that sounds like I have all the power and it's exciting. It's like really exciting.
Yeah. It is exciting. It becomes sort of the coolest aspect of creating something, because quite often what will happen is with that point of view character, you'll need to throw some other people in there, right? Just for them to play off of.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so you invent a few names and you throw a few characters in and throw a few details. And then those characters just start coming alive, and becoming very interesting. And then usually it's because they're interesting to the character whose point of view you're using. But then they become interesting just from the writing point of view, because you want to find out more about these characters. And so you end up following the same journey that your point of view character does, in terms of trying to sort of turn over all the leaves, all the pages on these other characters, and figure out where they are and what your relationship is with them. And then you switch point of views and you do it all over again. And it adds another facet to those same characters.
Yeah, and then you have a tree and you're just expanding out and out. And, you know, this is something that George R. R. Martin got criticized for his last two books, is people said he went too big. And I happen to love those books, because he's branching out. He's telling me about these minor houses, and, you know, Jamie Lannister's walking around and talking to these people, and you're getting backstory, and Jamie's talking about how he views them because of the way his dad did and all this stuff. And I know a lot of people think it's like meandering or didn't have direction, but to me, that's what made the world feel alive.
Well, yeah, I would agree. It's one of those things where you have scenes, you have whole threads, you have whole story plot lines, whatever, that may not go anywhere, or episodic events that just, you know, get left in your wake. But they're all serving a purpose, and that purpose is to flesh out the world and make. Do you remember the film Willow?
Yes, it's been a while.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, problematic film, but there was one aspect that really made me sit up and take notice, and it's when it's in Mad Mortigan, Val Kilmer he's been imprisoned in this hanging cage on a crossroads. I think that's when we first meet him, and so our point of view characters are the Hobbit stand-ins, whatever they were, and they come up and they're having a conversation with him, and then this army rides past. And it just rides, you know, from one end of the scene to the other. It just rides past, and they're all heading off somewhere. And at that moment, suddenly you realize that even though you've been with this particular point of view, and you've been following the storyline and the found baby and all the rest, there actually is a world outside, off stage, and events are occurring out there somewhere, and they're going to have repercussions that come back to these characters. That's world building. That is how you expand everything, just by that one scene of him, this army riding through. Because if you were to then follow that army, well, I mean, if I remember the storyline, they get absolutely hammered, and are in full retreat. Well, that's a whole story in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's left to the imagination, because we only see them later when they're in full retreat, and only a few of them are left. That, to me, that's the kind of stuff that you can pull off in fiction. That film, because it's focused on the main character or characters, it is so plot driven that it has almost no room for the extraneous side stuff, the side quests, all those other events that are occurring that are actually thickening that world beyond the stage of what you're writing. And so, yeah, I'm all in favor of all of those meandering explorations that the writer is up to, because they're not just sort of, it's not masturbation. I mean, they're actually doing something worthwhile there, right?
Yeah,
so
like there's a purpose behind it.
There's a purpose behind it, and it may not be plot driven purpose. That does not make it any less valuable.
Yeah.
So I think maybe because we watch so much film and television, which is so straight line focused, in every scene has to serve the plot, that we've gotten out of practice of that idea of just wandering a landscape and seeing what's to be seen, whether it's relevant or not.
I think that's a phenomenal point, and something I've seen people say this before about Malazan, and people talk about the characterization being different, all this stuff. But I've seen multiple people say, "Oh, I just got back into reading." Maybe they read Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, and they said, "Okay, I'm going to read something else." And someone hands it, Malazan to them, and they're fine because they haven't read 100 books in a very personable. This is tell a lot of telling and basic storytelling, which is fine. That's totally a valid way of doing things. But they don't have the preconceived notion that's the correct way of doing things, and they're fine with it. I think that's really interesting because a lot of people say, "Oh, wait to read Malazan. Like you got to read for a long time and then you can read Malazan." But I think you're right, and I think you're right on the money with that. We've kind of been trained by the popular things, which again, that those are valid ways of telling stories, and that is fine. We can critique them all we want, but at the end of the day, you can tell a story that way, and that's good. But it does happen to make everything else seem that it's going against the grain, but it is also a valid way of telling a story.
What it is it's economical. And of course, think about the pressures on filmmaking and television making. You have to be as economical as possible.
That's 100%
there can be no extraneous stuff. And so if that's what you've grown up on, then you open up a book and it doesn't even occur to you that these pages cost 0.0000001 cent per page. And so it's no real there's no economic aspect to it, to there being 50 more pages than there should be, or 100 more pages or 500 more pages. So if the mindset is, well, we're starting this story now, so we got to fall into those deep ruts, those tracks, and run it all the way through to the end, then that mindset's not prepared for a book that, like War and Peace, is going to go all over the place, right? So, but one of the I think the problematic aspects of that is that if they're not prepared for all that stuff, they may often abandon while it's still out there, fully expanded out there.
Yeah.
And so they never realize that as far out as you go with the stories and side stories, you are going to bring it all the way around and bring it to a single point at the end of the book.
Yeah.
And so if they abandon partway through, then they'll say, well, this book just starts sprawling all over the place and all this stuff that doesn't really go anywhere, and et cetera.
Certainly.
And they stop reading halfway through. And so that experience is a valid one for them because they never saw where it all led, where it all ended up.
Yeah, and I think obviously, if we use the example of A Song of Ice and Fire, the fact that the next book hasn't come out, I think people can now look back and say, well, forget all these plot lines. We didn't get that. So I think that also puts a lens on that example specifically. But I think what you're saying in a general sense is completely like that. That's exactly right. I do want to point out that one more meme I need you says that was my exact experience. Speaking about how I said just jumping into Malazan from the get-go, and you have no preconceived notions of what a story should be like. So that's cool that someone's here that actually had that experience. And let me see if I can find this. I thought it was a really good question. Zan says, given these type of concerns for TV and film, do you have any desire anymore to go back to Gardens of the Moon as a script? How would it be adapted? Is it adaptable in your mind?
We lost the script. Both Cam and I, we have no idea where, and I suspect we'll never find it.
It's with the Bronze Age stuff. It's with the Bronze Age stuff.
It really is.
Yeah,
it's gone. But in terms of adaptability, we got very close. In fact, we had a handshake deal that fell through, which probably turned out to be a good thing because it was with the Weinstein group. So yeah, good thing it didn't happen. But so Cam and I, we met up in Orlando when this was all sort of taking place and the contracts were getting readied, and we asked ourselves, well, how can we think in terms of adaptation for a television series? And the first thing that occurred to us that we needed to pick up Tavor's story and stay with it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we worked out, some aspects of the storyline that we would have to follow. So she would be in the Capitol, and that would be one of the threads of the first season. Is her experiences that eventually lead up to her becoming adjunct. So there's going to be a lot of political intrigue, a lot of stuff going on close to the throne of the Malazan Empire, which isn't in the books, but we were definitely prepared to sort of at least outline what was going to have to happen there. It's very much adaptable, but one has to realize that film and television are completely distinct media from books. And so if you look at these things and go into them expecting you're going to get the book on the screen, that's not how it works. It's there's a lot of condensing, there's a lot of conflation, there's a lot of merging of characters, and there's different mechanics are required. And so I would always view these, like what's happening now with Wheel of Time, view it as a new version of the story, a retelling of the story through a different medium. And so the story elements and the broader aspects will probably be adhered to, but not necessarily the specifics, because times have changed. So even attitudes, in terms of gender and all the rest, that's all changed. And one has to acknowledge the presence, or the present, if you will, for the audience, the cultural state that we are in at this moment. And that, if you want to actually honor the books with an adaptation, you have to pull in your present. It has to be there to actually transform these books, because that is actually what's honoring the books. So I would think, I'm looking forward to Wheel of Time. I haven't watched any of it yet, but I will. I think anything is adaptable, and it's simply how you're going to approach it.
I love that answer for a multitude of reasons. To hear someone who has a massive success, millions of copies sold, and obviously this is the story that you and a friend have co-authored, this world, and for you to say, hey, they have to make some changes, they got to adapt it. I think it is so important to hear this from an author.
Well, the other side of it is, and I've thought about this, if we do sell rights to this thing, I may actually have to get my agent to slip into the contract that AP Kahneman be hired as story editor.
Let's go.
Because I don't know of anybody better, and I know a lot of people who are involved in this. In terms of the ability to analyze structure and to analyze film and television and find out where it works and where it doesn't work, there's nobody better than AP. And so I would be and so would Cam. We'd be very, very comfortable if AP was sitting there as story editor.
I think AP, I think every single person, and people are saying hooray for AP as a story editor. I mean, in a world where micro interactions are everything, 10-second video clips, the fact that AP is putting out videos, he's not doing a bunch of fancy editing, he's sitting down and he's giving you, true gold, right? And people are watching. His channel is growing. AP is so talented. Oh, it's amazing. And I believe you're the one who told him to start a channel. Is that correct?
Me and his wife, and we were harassing him basically endlessly because he is a natural lecturer. like in the best sense
Yes.
of the academic, like the best professors you've ever had. That's kind of AP. So, and it was just waiting to happen, and he just sort of needed to embrace the media form and go with it.
Yeah, and he's done a great job. I
Yeah.
think he comes across very well on camera. And AP has made me a better creator in a lot of ways. We were talking after our podcast, and he was talking about like what's a review and what goes into review and what's a reaction.
Mm.
And I'll be honest, I mean, most of my stuff, if you go on, like YouTube has redefined what a review is in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not breaking down, well, this is a third person perspective novel, and the the mechanics of the book or the tropes used in the book are a chosen one. Maybe you'll mention that, but a lot of it is about the subjective personal experience that you
Mm-hmm.
had. And I think that's fine. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
valid thing. One of the coolest things that we do here on BookTube is honestly, you can find people that you align with or don't align with, and then you can judge based on that. I've had amazing conversations with people I disagree with. For instance, Alan from Library of Alexandria, he didn't enjoy books 4 and 5 of A Song of Ice and Fire. I argued my point, and now at one point he's going to reread them. So like,
Yeah.
that's cool,
Cool.
right? Like that's fun. But AP really challenged me to think about what I'm doing here and what am I trying to accomplish whenever I make a review. And is it really a review or is it reaction? And I think it made me feel like a little vulnerable, to be honest. You go on and you try to do your best and you think you're doing well, and someone puts it in a different frame and you say, okay, well, am I doing the right stuff? Am I doing a good job? Am I representing the material that people have worked on very hard well enough? And am I putting it across?
Yeah, I it's a weird thing. I mean, when people think, this intimidates me or this person intimidates me, whatever. When I think of it in terms of the favorite books I've read, every one of them intimidated the hell out of me. And I loved it for it. I loved those books for that reason. I wanted to be intimidated because then you rise to the challenge or you don't. I mean, you might fail and rise into the challenge, but at least you try.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I would advise, for what it's worth, reviewers out there, yeah, by all means, look at AP stuff and listen to what he's talking about and the precision of his language, which is what he's really speaking to. He's speaking to be precise. If you're going to have a reaction, call it a reaction, right? Don't call it a review because it's just a reaction. That's useful stuff. That's stuff that your back may get up on it, but that's fine because the dust will settle and something will come out of it that you can make use of at some point or another.
Yeah. Be able to have those conversations, because words are important in a multitude of ways, really. I really enjoyed, I read your AMA on Reddit that you do once every 10 years, apparently, which I thought was funny.
I think I've got something coming up in December 21st, something around there.
I'll definitely be on there. I'll be on there for that, because I thought your AMA was incredible. You have a quote. Well, I'm making it a quote from you. When someone asks you about like their own self-critic, which is something I identify with, and I'll explain why in a second. But you said about self-doubt, you said, I sacrificed the inner critic to the god of ambition and shouted down its ghost at every turn. I loosed the hounds of failure and had them baying at my heels every moment of every day. The inner critic has a place and a role. The inner critic is there to make your work better, not shut it down. If it shuts you down, kill it. First off, dude, that's a amazing string of words. I mean, that got my blood pumping, man. So kudos to you.
Well, I mean, yeah, the inner critic is the thing. Is everything that is internal to us in terms of our mindsets has value. We may not appreciate it, and we may not even understand it because it's quite reactive in many ways to external stimuli and all the rest. But it all has value, and so even the things that you don't want to think about and you don't want to explore in any fashion for whatever reason, because it doesn't make you feel good, or it's it can lead you to strange places or unpleasant, unfamiliar places.
Certainly.
All of those things, they are free for you to explore. And I think one, I think it's kind of sort of being self-analytical in that sense. But recognizing that you are free to explore all aspects of yourself, including pain, including grief, including sadness, including sorrow,
Yeah.
including unpleasant memories, including regrets. All of these things, especially for the artist, this is your source. That is your source. And to shy away and to sort of in any sense try to sort of avoid, I mean, avoidance is a big thing for all of us. Well, we avoid all kinds of things, but every now and then it's worth recognizing that avoidance is simply delaying something. It's not a permanent thing. And so, to turn back and to walk that ground again, for an artist is where you will find, I think, the things that you really want to be exploring in your art. That's where it's found. It's not found in the easy stuff. It's like I often say, people ask me for one line of advice to a beginning writer, and my line is finish what you start. Because generally what happens is short stories, novels, you name it, you start up and you've got these ideas and you're really, really excited about them. And so you get on the keyboard and you're just ripping away, 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, and then it starts slowing down, and then it starts turning into a grind. And what needs to be recognized there is that those first 4 pages, you already know how to do that. It's the next 54 pages or 500 pages where you are going to learn something new.
Let's go.
First 4 pages, you haven't learned anything new. And that's why it is so crucial to finish what you start, because that process, once you're past the easy stuff, is where you learn. And once you complete a manuscript or a story or anything, the feeling you get from it is indescribable, and it makes you want to do it all over again. So
yeah, it's funny you say that, because one of the things that I've had to overcome as an individual in my life is finishing strong. I tend to temper off in life at many things, and it's just that something I've accepted now that I've gotten older, but I also accepted the fact that it's not permanent and that I can fix it.
Yeah.
And when I just wrote a short story this past year, and I chose a short story for 2 reasons. One, I think the idea of like combining a bunch of short stories into like a longer like thing is very interesting. And then second, I said, I can finish this. Like, I know I could do this. So that's what I did. And I wrote, and really, I think it's a borderline novella. Like, it's somewhere between those 2 things, but finishing it. I mean, I think only 20 people have read it. I didn't release it to the public. I've released it to my patrons and had a couple people who helped me edit it and stuff, which I very much appreciate if you're watching. But even then, putting the period and writing the end is one of the greatest accomplishments I've had in my life. And I've done some stuff that I would label as pretty cool. I've wrestled in my tights or underwear in front of 10,000 people. And I feel just as accomplished finishing a short story. And it taught me, and that was progress, not just for writing, but in my life. I said, look, I can finish something. I can do this.
Yeah. It's validation. And there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to that validation. And that's what makes it so valuable when you get there. Definitely.
Yeah. And it's a skill. It's a skill to end something, right? Like finishing a book, writing up an ending, tying it all up, or, getting the reader interested to pick up the next one or something like that is a skill in itself. I know people who struggle with the beginnings of books. I know people who struggle with the middle, and I know people who struggle with the end. But when you finally do it all, even if one outshines the other, it's just a complete project that you yourself have done. And you've put an exclamation point on something that it will live forever, technically. And to me, there's definitely a like when I talk about writing, and something that I really want to get into is there is an absolute selfish aspect of it that piece of work is like immortalized.
It is ruthlessly selfish.
Yeah.
It is. It's kind of scary, selfish, because you will loot your all of your experience in order to get that onto the page in some fashion or another. You know, when I was writing Toll the Hounds, I was basically digging my way through the grief I was feeling at the time and putting it on the page. And that's just, it seems cold, it seems mercenary. It seems as if you're actually feeding on yourself and bleeding in the process. But that's, for me, that's the only way I know how to do it. It has to mean, as much as it does for me, for the reader to actually get anything emotionally from it. I have to plumb those depths first.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's a pretty emotional thing.
It is. It's hard.
Yeah. I think that, so at the end of my story, there's a letter written from someone who has passed to someone who has to now take a responsibility over. And when I wrote the letter, I thought about if I was saying bye to like my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's emotional talking about it right now, man. Like,
you
know, I went to a very dark place, and I was not in a very good mood that day. But
we go to those places,
but
we go to them in order to come back from them, right? And that's part of the storytelling process. It's part of, you know, we're all you know, the main characters in our ongoing narrative, and I guess the more that character, that self can experience, I don't know, it's almost as if the more valid everything seems, or not valid, the more worthwhile all of these things are, even the things that, you know, we'd rather not happen to us, or rather not experience. But it pays for the writer, for the artist. Mm-hmm. It pays to go to those places, and to go back to them if you have to, like, you know, 20, 30 times in the course of your life, you go back to them. I mean, how many writers end up exploring one aspect of the human condition for their entire careers? Yeah. You know, that's not uncommon. And it becomes an obsession, and it becomes something that you got to keep throwing sort of lobs of clay, wet clay at the invisible rock. And you just keep circling that rock, and you're throwing and throwing and throwing. Yeah.
I know that you said Midnight Tides was the easiest book to write, as far as like it just wrote itself. What was the hardest book to write, and like what was like the hardest time in your life to write?
You would think those moments of you know, personal grief and all the rest would be the hardest times to write. No, not at all. They were my salvation. They were my bridge through it, over it all, or not over it, through it. The hardest ones to write were hard because of structural reasons. Right. So, Memories of Ice stretched me lengthwise, and in terms of story,
it's epic.
Well, it's you know, I mean, it's my third one, and it stretched me. Let's put it that way. I ended up using muscles I didn't know I had with that one. Mm-hmm. Bone Hunters was a challenge structurally, because it's basically 2 novels.
I just finished it.
Did you? Yeah.
You're a madman.
It's 2 novels, and Fall of Light was extremely, probably, I mean, if you were to ask AP, he would say that was the toughest haul for sure. Yeah.
I think it's interesting you said that the easier times is when you are feeling some of the harder things in life, and I couldn't agree with you more. I get most of the time where I finally get myself to sit down and write something is on my worst days. I'm really thinking about, you know, what is this all about? what am I thinking of? And you know, someone who does this really, really well, and I know you'll agree, because I think that you've had some influence on this person, and it's R. Scott Baker. Oh man, I just finished the Prince of Nothing trilogy, and you want to talk about going to uncomfortable places. I mean, he goes there in spades, and sits there and builds a campfire and tells you a couple tales. But I get it. I get what he's doing, and he goes into some really interesting views on not just life, and he's obviously into philosophy and whatnot. But that kind of stuff like gets me motivated to write, like to see someone go to those uncomfortable places and make it make sense and tell a really good story. For some reason, just resonates with me. Really does. I felt like his work and then reading your work around the same time. It was like I was bouncing back and forth between ideas almost, and it's just how they're explored in each different the different worlds is fascinating to me.
Yeah. I mean, our world views are fundamentally different.
Yeah.
You know, I've sat and talked with Scott. Yeah, we're coming from two very different places for sure.
Yeah, and I would say that you're more optimistic.
That's a bit of an understatement, I would say. Yeah,
Just a wee bit, man.
a wee bit. Yeah,
Just a wee bit. I saw you say that that your younger self was more hopeful, and you don't necessarily think that your younger self is wrong, but you feel bad for your younger self.
I don't know if I feel bad for my younger self.
Maybe the phrasing was I can't remember the exact phrasing, but you were talking about how your younger self was more hopeful, and you don't necessarily think that your younger self is wrong. I think the word was pity. I felt like you used the word pity, maybe.
Pity.
Yeah.
Interesting. I must have been in a dark place at that moment.
Well, you were on Reddit, so that would be a
well, that would put me pretty dark. Yeah. No, I just recognize the younger self as as possessing elements that I no longer possess. You know, on both sides of the ledger. Certainly, there was more. I guess more energy for driving towards sort of the biggest thing I could imagine, the 10-book series.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a hurry, and you wouldn't know it for the size of the books, but there was a kind of almost desperate need to get the 10 books done. And I had the reserves of energy and creative energy to do that. And so I look back, and yeah, it can be hard to recognize, you know, the person who actually pulled that off, because, you know, the older one gets, the less, or the fewer reserves, I think, of energy that one has. So.
Yeah, something my grandpa used to say to me was, "When you have the itch, scratch it, son." And and you had the itch, and I relate to that in a lot of ways. Talking about, like, you're not necessarily even like the same person, you don't have the same things, and like, I think back whenever I was doing wrestling, and I was burning the candle at both ends. I was getting 4 hours sleep a night. I was working full time. I was in school online, and I was traveling, 4 or 5 days a week, and wrestling as much as possible. And I was just a savage, and I was obsessed with the ambition of being something that I was not supposed to be. I was never supposed to make it. I was never supposed to be able to do these things. And oh man, it lit a fire underneath me. Yeah. And now that guy is gone. he's not here now. That doesn't mean I'm not motivated to do things or whatnot, but that, like, killer mentality is totally gone. And in some ways I'm happy, because that version of me was very selfish.
Yeah, you certainly have to find the right partner to survive that kind of stuff, right? Yes. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate on that regard. I took a lot of time for myself, and now, being older and whatnot, it's good to kind of give back. Would you say that you felt obsessed with writing whenever you were writing the main 10? Yeah,
absolutely. But that obsession started long before that. Those 10 books. It started. Yeah, it started pretty early on. And it took me coming here to University of Victoria from my undergraduate, dropping out of the archaeology side of things. Mm-hmm. It took a couple of teachers to sort of really open up, in terms of how they described writing, to really open up the possibilities and the potentialities of storytelling. Because up until that point, I was, I think one of my first short stories, the point of view was absolutely perfect, but entirely accidental, right? I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. But I had my instincts, I guess, and I stayed with that. And, I remember sitting in that workshop, the first, when the story was being discussed, and my teacher just starting to discuss and tell everybody else about point of view control as being, perfect. And, when you're being critiqued in these workshops, you're not supposed to say anything. So I didn't say anything. So, you just basically sit there and look as if, I knew exactly what I was doing. but the truth was I didn't. But it was an educational process where when he started talking about it, I realized that, oh, so that's what point of view control is. That's what point of view is. That's what consistency is. And so just so many writers, and I think even to this day, are still instinctive in their writing. They know what works, and they follow it, and they can trust their instincts. Because bear in mind that creative writing programs, that's a relatively recent phenomenon in terms of English literature, in terms of literature. So how did all these people before the workshops figure it all out, right? Well, they did. They figured it out. They didn't need the programs. They didn't need somebody else to tell them. But these days we have that, and even people like AP and what he's discussing.
Yeah,
it's extremely relevant to the writer.
Very helpful.
Not just to the reader. It's good for the writer, for sure.
Yeah.
To listen to that stuff.
As someone who doesn't have an undergraduate degree in English or creative writing or anything like that, and as someone one day I'm going to capitalize on my obsessive personality and I'm going to dive super hard into writing.
Yeah.
What would you recommend for someone who doesn't have the traditional sense of education at a university or something? Like, do you think going to these workshops is a good idea? Obviously,
workshops can be good, but you have to go in there. You have to go in there into a workshop, first of all, being completely aware that they are your fellow workshoppers and your instructors are not your audience. Unless you want to be writing short stories about creative writing instructors teaching creative writing,
right.
That's sort of the downside of or the literal extreme of writing what you know. And we get a lot of that. We get a lot of contemporary fiction that is written by a professor and the characters are a professor, and they're working on a novel and the character's working on the novel, and it's like they don't go very far. The imagination doesn't reach very far, but that can be quite successful. So anyways, they are not your audience, and so you have to take their critiques with a huge grain of salt and sift through the things that you find will be useful to you and dump the rest.
Yeah.
And if you think about it in those ways, then you're spending a lot of money for maybe not very much, at the end of the day. But those things that you do take with you, and the fact that you're reading everybody else's works and you're seeing the areas where they are struggling, and then you're listening to the teacher, and hopefully a good teacher, who basically describes why these struggles are occurring and what needs to be addressed and how do you need to look at these things.
Yeah.
So you learn sort of just through the entire environment that you happen to be in. But the second thing a workshop like Clarion or something like that is really useful for is that one tends to go into these things feeling like a fraud, right? And feeling guilty for actually taking time away from other things to work on a short story or a novel and all the rest.
Yeah.
Because we've got jobs, we got families, we've got domestic necessities and all the rest, and so it becomes this guilty pleasure that you are taking time away, and it feels selfish, like you say. It feels extremely selfish.
Yeah.
But you take a workshop, and there you've got an institution that is giving you permission to write. That by itself actually can be more than anything you get out of the workshops. Is that this is what you're here for. You're here to write, so write, right?
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of pressure off, I think, in a lot of ways. It removes the guilt from the process, which can happen. I wrote Gardens of the Moon and couldn't get it published for 8 years. I felt pretty bad for the 6 months in which I wrote Gardens of the Moon, until I got a publisher.
Yeah.
Because I could have been doing other things, could have been writing other things. So
yeah, 8 years is a long time.
Yeah, it sucked. Yeah.
How did you, how did you kill the inner critic? How did you keep going during that? It sounds so arduous.
Yeah. Well, I was writing contemporary fiction at the same time. And that's the other thing, is that if I don't write, I become difficult to live with. So it's better that I write.
I'm the
and
same
even
way
if the
working
stuff,
out.
yeah, even if the stuff never sees the light of day, it's just better that I write. So I continued writing. I was doing all kinds of jobs, really soul destroying jobs, and so the writing stuff was kind of the symptom or emblematic of the dream that I was aiming for, which was to one day become a full-time writer. And so that was the goal I'd set for myself. And yeah, you get knocked down a lot. And I was getting pulled in the direction of contemporary fiction in Canada, where I was getting I got a Canada Council grant, major grant, and then I was getting other grants, lesser grants. And the expectation there is you run the grant circuit, and then you eventually get a job at a university teaching creative writing, and you become part of Can Lit, whatever that is. And you're happy if you sell 500 copies of your books. Yeah. And I was being pulled in that direction, and a part of me just really recoiled at the thought. And so we moved to the UK. And the novel I took with me was a coming of age novel set in set just north of Winnipeg, in Canada. And it occurred to me that kind of setting would feel exotic to British readers. So I thought I had a better chance of actually getting it published in the UK than I did in Canada. And so I took it with me, and that's how I got my agent. And then I got that book published. And then, of course, the agent immediately asked, well, what are you doing? What's your next book? Right? Because, yeah. And so I cleaned up Gardens of the Moon and put it in his hands, and I guess the rest is history. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a long, tough journey. And I couldn't really imagine the mental hurdles you have to overcome to keep on that road. I went to WWE, which is like the highest of highs, right, for pro wrestling, and I got told no 6 times. I went for 6 different tryouts.
Yeah.
And admittedly, on the 6th one, I think I was like, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe this isn't going to happen. But for me, I would say I was fortunate enough to know that making it was something else entirely different at that point. So I was very lucky. But I remember, man, like going and giving everything and being like, I was on a good run and had a good showing, and they don't even have any feedback for you. Like, you're not even getting good feedback at some points. And you're just like, I guess I got to just keep showing up. I just got to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And those are some of the hardest nights of my life, in the car, 2 a.m. driving the 12 hours back to wherever I was going for the next show, and just being like, okay, I guess, back to the grind. It's all worth it. It's all going to be worth it one day. But you say that, but there was a lot of times where I didn't think it was going to be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. It you get knocked down a lot.
Yeah.
And you just pick yourself up and keep going. I don't know. It's strange, because I didn't sort of get everything started up and running in terms of writing until my 40s. So I felt late coming to the game.
That's actually really encouraging to hear, because I turned 31 in 2 days, and I'm just like, is this too late? Because you hear about people taking 8, 10, 12, 20 years to get a book published, which maybe that's not what I want out of this. I don't know. But I certainly would like it. Sounds good. It sounds really good.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is one can get in the trap of reworking one book for 10 years. And it's a trap in 2 senses, because say you get it published, you've spent, say, 5-6 years on that novel, or 10 years on that novel. It's a pretty polished novel by that point, right?
Yeah.
And then they say, well, you've got 18 months to produce the next one. It's like, whoa, so you're not prepared for that. So I would certainly recommend you write a novel, print it out, stick it on the shelf in your office and start the next one. And maybe 5 months later, 4 or 5 months later, pull the other one down and go through it, because you'll be a better editor at that point, because you've been working on the new one,
right?
Exploring new ideas and new ways of saying things, and do your revision from that point onwards. And so you're always every book that I deliver to the publisher, I stop thinking about, because I'm already thinking about the next one, right? So one of those potential traps is to continually rework the same work endlessly.
Yeah.
Because you will, by virtue of reading and rereading and rereading and reworking, you will suck the freaking life out of it, and so you'll lose the joy of writing. The joy comes from new stuff. It comes from what you discover on the next page. That's what keeps you going. Believe me, it's no fun doing a copy edit or an edit or that kind of. It's no fun. It's just.
It's funny you say that, because like that's exactly my experience in the short story I wrote. Yeah, oh, dude. Like I remember telling my wife, I was like, I think I was on like the third round of people reading and giving me some editing to do, because I'm not gonna go and buy pay an editor to do this whole thing for this kind of like experiment, right? I was on like my third round of edits, and I was like, I am ready to move on, folks.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to read about Dimitri and this stupid sword anymore. Like, he's dead to me. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Or I want to continue the tale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the thing is, by creating that temporal distance from actually working on the thing and finishing the story, you acquire a new level of objectivity, because the thing that you're working on at the moment, you've poured your heart and soul into it. So it's personal.
Yes.
It's very personal. And that's why in workshops, for people who come to workshops for the first time, delivering that first story is terrifying, because it's like, you peeled your own skin off and you're handing, your flesh and bones for other people to pick over. Yeah. And it can be, it can be terrifying. So workshops, that's one thing that workshops are good for. They teach you, you learn to have a tough skin, a tough hide, that you can take the blows and not be overly bothered by them. So that establishes a kind of objectivity and a kind of distance from your work, which is really, really useful, because let's face it, even if you get published, people out there, some people are going to hate it. Yeah,
definitely.
And they're going to say you can't write, and they're going to say this, that, and the other. And it's just, if you don't have a tough hide, that can be pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's something I did earn in the wrestling world.
Yes, I'm sure you did.
Yeah. So like, it's actually funny, because on BookTube, I'll get a thumbs down or someone will tell me I'm an idiot. That happens all the time, and I'm just like, that's fine. This is way better than when people used to like say I looked fat at a certain, you know what I mean? Just destroy me.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can think I'm an idiot. I know I'm an idiot. That's fine. But I will say, with writing, there are times where, like, if there's a certain line or a scene, someone's like, I don't like that. And I'm like, I like that. And then you have to say, am I being prideful? And this is obviously my short little experimental experience, but it's funny hearing you say these things, because it's like exactly how my inner monologue has went in my head as I've written stuff.
Yeah. And sometimes the lines you love the most are the ones you eventually cut, because they just didn't fit. So
yeah,
that's how it goes. So yeah, I mean, we can sort of hold on to these things, and the editor has to tear it out of your hands, kind of stuff. But usually it's for good reason. So that's why I think it's good to have always projects on the go. Just keep going. It's momentum more than anything else. I remember when there's a story from, I can't remember who it was, but he was an editor at a publisher's, and John Gardner, American writer who wrote Grendel and various other books. He showed up on a motorcycle with a backpack and walked into the office and laid down, this much manuscripts. And the editor basically went through them and said, well, this is a short story, this is a novel, this is a short story, this is a novella, and just split them all up. But you can't do that unless you've got that pile, right? You got to have that all that paper. You got to have your stories done. There's no shortcut. You got to write it. You got to write the stuff that you're going to write, and just keep going and let it pile up. It's all going to be useful at some point.
And not me not editing as I went was huge. When I said this can, and sometimes I wrote stuff and I was like, that was trash, like it just straight trash. And I'm like, this probably won't even happen in the final version, but let's just spit it out there and see what happens. And sometimes that would work out, sometimes it wouldn't. But it's something like not getting too caught up in the moment and just letting it roll and letting it roll.
Yeah.
I'm very much
for me. Part of my process is I don't think about word count, daily word count, or daily page count. Some days I get 3 paragraphs done. Some days I'll get 10 pages, and it all evens out in the end. So
that's so interesting to hear, because one of the things I kind of wanted to highlight this because, a lot of people give Brandon Sanderson a lot of credit, and kudos to him. He writes a ton, and he has a system, and he's basically a robot, I think. But
yeah, pretty much.
You're someone who is very active. Like, you did not take a long time between the Malazan books, and these are not they are not short books, and they're also not simple books. I mean, they are so intricate, just layers upon layers upon layers. So kudos to you. I mean, when I looked at the publication dates between the books, I was so impressed.
I was ripping through. I would take about 5 months, 5.5 months per book. But you see, it's all one story, right? It's just it physically cannot be put into one volume. Believe me, I tried just recently. So it's like when you're writing a short story, you know where the ending is, and you want to get there, don't you? I mean, so you become, you're driven to get to that ending. Well, I was driven to get to the ending of the 10-book series, because I had scenes there that were in my head from like book 1. Yeah. And I don't want to forget them, right? So they haunted me, and I just had to get there.
I liked what Stephen King said about ideas and notebooks, and people said, do you write down your ideas? And he was like, I feel like notepads are making bad ideas like eternal or something along those lines. He's like, if something's a great idea, it will haunt me. It will literally drive me mad until I write it. And if I keep thinking about it, I know it's a good idea. Or at least that he has the ability to write something that he thinks is quality with it. And I love that. I really love that. And it's interesting to hear that you had like the idea of this end mapped out, because one, there's just so much that you've done with these books. Like, it is wild. Reading it fries my brain sometimes. I can't imagine writing it, but I hear about, the gardener that kind of lets things roll to them as they go. And then you hear about like the architect type of thing. And it seems like you have a firm grasp on where you wanted to go with the story. If I had to have guessed, I would have never guessed that about you. I would have assumed that this grew on you over time.
No, I knew exactly where it was going, but I did not take notes in the sense of pulling the narrative through from book 1 to book 9. I wanted lots of room for spontaneous invention and creation. Because that's what entertains me as a writer. If I've taken too many notes and I know too much about it, again, some of the fire disappears. I want to be surprised, in scenes and where they're going. And I can think of a number of eventual sort of fates of particular characters that I did not know was going to happen until I got there, or I could start to sense it coming. Certainly Reaper's Gale is a good example of that one.
Just started last night.
I won't say anything more.
I'm so excited.
I sensed something was coming, and I just had to let it arrive organically. Wow. So leaving that kind of room, the writer has to entertain oneself in the process of the writing. And so if you overthink it, and if you over diagram it and all that kind of stuff, that creative process you've used up half the tank, right? You've enjoyed creating the maps and all the rest, and the diagrams and character lists and plot points and all the rest. But now when you start to write the story, you've only got half a tank, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you just be really, this is my process anyway, so it's different for other people, but be very cursive and very, very vague in your notes. Basically, I do a lot of character lists just to make sure I don't forget people, and I do anyways. Or they swap genders between books and weird crap like that. But I leave a lot of room, and because that's, without that room, then I'm not being entertained by the story I'm telling.
Yeah.
And if I'm not being entertained, nobody else will be.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the portion of writing that interests me the most and gets me most like fired up, is the improv, right? While you're writing and figuring it out, and like you're kind of living the story as you write it. And I remember hearing like George R. R. Martin talk about that, and it inspired me in some way. Like a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, that sounds so fun to go off and be in somewhere else.
Yeah. Basically, you're writing the story you would like to have read.
Yeah, exactly.
You would like someone else to have written, but nobody else did, so you're writing it.
Yeah. And I hate drawing so many parallels between me wrestling, but like, I mean, you're an accomplished author, and that's the only thing I've ever accomplished in my life. So I'm going to continue to make these parallels.
No, it's good. It works.
But in wrestling, we have an idea what's going to happen in the ring, right? Like we kind of go over, we know who's going to win. But for me, in the way I was training,
wait a minute. Are you saying that stuff is just choreographed and fake?
Don't tell anybody.
Oh man,
you're gonna piss Alabama off real bad.
Yeah. My whole worldview is just crumbling at the moment. Okay.
Yeah, I always said, if you need someone to fake kick ass, I'm your guy. I'm the dude. But in wrestling, some people plan out every single step of the match to the T. I'm talking to the T, like how you take your steps and stuff. Crazy, right? For me, I was trained in a very old school manner where you listen to the audience, and as you're wrestling, you're creating the match. Like you might know where it's going, but how to get to that ending is wide open. And you'll be working with someone, and if they're properly trained, you can say, "Oh man, they really didn't like that." Literally in the match, I'm saying this to my opponent, right? Having a headlock, and I'm talking crap to the audience, and in between yelling when they're booing, I'm like, all right, they didn't like, they love that, more of that, and we're creating the story on the fly. And to me, those were the matches. Like when I did that for an hour with someone, one, it creates a bond with the other person that I some of the guys I haven't talked in 7 years that I still hold dear in my heart, because we made a story that night that was amazing. But two, that's the fun. Like that to me, that's the talent and the art of that performance. And for writing, I feel very much the same way. I think if I planned out every single little thing, I would just completely lose motivation. And I think that's why when I got towards the end of my story and I knew how it was going to end, I would say I lost a little bit of motivation, like towards the end. And I think my end is kind of rushed, to be honest. And some people did tell me that when they read it, and I believe them because I wasn't as motivated. I was beginning to think about the next story that I wanted to figure out as I went. So I resonate a lot with what you said there.
Yeah. When did you finish the story?
Oh, it's probably been about 2 or 3 months ago since I put the final cap. And I think I actually did make a slight edit. One of my patrons read it, and she gave me some feedback, and I went back and jogged some stuff down. It's one of those things where when I go back and read it, there's parts of it that bother me, but I'm not sure if I'm good enough to fix those things yet, if that makes sense.
When did you last go back to reread it?
Probably about 2 months ago.
2 months ago?
Yeah, probably about 2 months ago.
I put it away for 8 months. Don't read it. Don't think about it. Write your next story.
That's and that's what I think I want to do too, because I have a story that's been on my mind for about 5 years, and I just have always felt like I wasn't good enough to write it. And I'm starting to realize that it doesn't matter.
You won't know until you write it, right?
Fair enough. I mean, I think that. So, I mean, that's a good question for you though. Like, when do you become good enough? Like, do you ever feel good enough?
No.
No. That's wild.
And the longer the longer you've had, the more years you get. I look back on, because I have to go back. I had to for The God Is Not Willing, my latest book. I had to go back to some of the other books and read some stuff. Yeah, I read like the opening to House of Chains and things like that. And it was a strange feeling because I looked at it and said, I think I was a better writer then than I am now. And that's a hard thing to deal with as well.
Oof. Yeah.
So it would be one thing to look back and wince and cringe. And there are elements in some of those books, like Gardens of the Moon, where I really wince and cringe. I basically, the writing style of Gardens of the Moon was heavily influenced by the fact that it was being published in the UK, and my editor at least wanted some elements stylistically to resonate with English readers. And so, like the use of lad and lass, for example, that was never part of our lexicon. It became part of it initially in Gardens of the Moon. And we were both, because we'd both gone through masters in writing, both Cam and I. We were of the he said, she said school, similar to what Stephen King talks about in his books. And I had to sort of make changes there, where I put a lot more sort of active aspects in terms of what's framing the dialogues. And it became then a process of slowly training my editor back to my style of the he said. And it took me a couple books to get there. So there were sort of outside influences on how Gardens of the Moon is written stylistically that were not originally there. And so, parts of me would love to go back and just fix all that and then get rid of some really clunky lines and that kind of thing. But life's short.
I'll tell you what, man, that was one thing, going through now the first 6 books, I thought your dialogue improved vastly with each entry. I felt like the character voice got stronger and stronger and stronger. And now hearing that's part of the editing process, like I would have never known that.
Well, not the dialogue. Well, that aspects, lad and lass and things like that.
Right.
But the descriptives to the dialogue, is they're it's descriptive heavy in Gardens of the Moon. That's not my style, but it was perceived as, I guess, a way of pulling readers in,
right,
more so than the style I was using. And that's a judgment call, and I have no regrets in that respect. The editor I got is still my editor in the UK, and I mean that's an extraordinarily long and wonderful relationship, and it's a great friendship. And he's the guy who took the chance, when nobody else would. Yeah, that's so big. You don't forget these things.
Yeah, so. You never forget those people either.
You don't.
Never. There is people in the chat are just saying they heard you say that you felt like you had declined, and they respectfully disagree.
Well,
and Philip actually says that he believes that The God Is Not Willing is a masterpiece. I mean, I picked it up. I'm not going to read it till after the first 10 because I know there's some Toll the Hound stuff that's could be spoiled for me a little bit.
No, not really.
You don't think?
No,
because I'll read this right after Reaper's Gale.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's anything. No, there's no Toll the Hound stuff.
Actually,
no, it's not. It's actually so minor within Toll the Hounds that you probably wouldn't have remembered it. When you get to Toll the Hounds. So
well, then that might have just changed up my TBR because for one, dude, the art on the cover phenomenal. And Baron from Your Brain on Book said, "Can we acknowledge Malazan has the best titles in fantasy? How are they chosen?" And that's something I actually wanted to bring up. Your ability, you and Cam's ability to name things, immaculate. Like it's so good. And I see you have a guitar in the background, and I'm going to ask you about that in just a second. But I think the first 10 of your books or the first ten of Malazan here in the main series could just be a heavy metal like album, like song names. I mean, it would be amazing. Like the House of Chains. That's so metal, dude.
Mm.
Like if I started a metal band tomorrow, I would just scramble all the books and pick up one and be like, oh, we're Reaper's Gale. Like that's what I would call myself.
Yeah, I had the titles before I had anything else.
They're so good.
Before even the books were written. I had Gardens of the Moon. I mean, obviously, because that was our film script title, which is pretty strange title.
It's so good.
I liked it, and it felt different from everything else out there in terms of fantasy, because it's a poetic illusion that's set within that world, within the Malazan world. So that was it felt quite different. And Dead House was an Azath house that we had gamed, around and in. So it had its name already. And then, a lot of the other titles are very much thematically oriented, even though they're I mean, they're not abstract in that sense. I mean, maybe they are. I don't know, House of Chains, maybe. But anyways, it's metaphorical references, I think, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I even got questions on The God Is Not Willing and whether people, but that title just, it insisted that it be there. So I just gave up, and I actually don't think I have the second and third titles.
Well, I have complete trust in your ability to name things at this point, man. I really do. Like, The God Is Not Willing may be the best book title I've ever heard.
It's a weird one, isn't it?
It's so good.
It's not, I don't know how, is it even grammatical?
I'm not the person that we can ask AP tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
But from a consumer hype perspective, when I read that title and I saw the art, I was like, and I had to get it. Also, getting a hardback of any Malazan novel is like a novelty. Like, I have to have it.
Well, yeah, the cover was interesting because I think we went through maybe 5 versions.
Oh.
And the basic form was set up. I suggested what I wanted, and then I did a mock-up actually on Photoshop. And then Steve Stone took that and really just transformed it and gave that wonderful color tone. But we had a multitude of color tones running in it, possibilities. And I kept writing back to Steve saying, beef her up. She's got to be bigger. She's got to be bigger. And I don't mean just tall. I mean, she's got to be a substantial bigger up there. And I almost sense I was really twisting his arm on that one because he kept coming. She was gaining, maybe half an inch with each version.
You're pushing the limits.
Yeah, it just kept going. But I know people ask what character it is, and it should be clear. I mean, I'll say it now for people who've read it. Of course, it's Tangle Witch. So,
I don't think I've met Tangle Witch yet.
No, you haven't. No, you'll meet Tangle Witch in the book.
I'm pretty.
But I don't think it's not a huge spoiler. It's not.
No, it's fine. Yeah,
it's not going to end everything.
Well, the thing about this book that gets me so fired up, one, I love reading recent works. Like, seeing you grow like over the first 6 has been amazing, and the fact that I'm going to finish the 10, and then I'm going to do Cam's books, and then everything that you've written, in addition to this, I just love seeing the recent stuff. But I like the fact that this is after the main 10. I think that the world living on and doing things, like, so many times we get prequels, which is great. I love prequels, but it's like the go-to, and people don't write, I don't even want to say a sequel, but just like, hey, the world has moved on a bit and these things are happening. It's still alive. And as someone that's a fan of the world, that's awesome. That means it's still alive in my head, So that's like one of the most intriguing pieces about this book, I think.
Well, cultures and civilizations continue to evolve, right? They're constantly changing. And one sort of sub-theme of God Is Not Willing, that it's not spoilery because it's all thematic, is about cultural appropriation, because you have all kinds of new religions are springing up 10 years after the events of the 10 books. And they're being plucked from everywhere. and they're just being adopted, all over the place, because that is what cultures do. If they don't, they're dead. They are a dead culture. They need to appropriate it. They need to adapt it and absorb aspects and change. So that's one sort of element that's sitting underneath all of these things, which is not to actually denigrate the complaints of cultural appropriation, because there are some very, very valid complaints with that respect.
Yeah.
But from an anthropological point of view, it is very much a case that cultures will appropriate. That's what they do. It's part of their dialogue with their world.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come into contact with other cultures, that dialogue expands. And so the characteristics and details of that, how the culture then redefines itself, which it's constantly doing. Our culture is constantly redefining itself.
Well, yeah, and cultures also almost get deified to a certain extent, or like of legends, right?
And there's the huge risk of mistaking, or rather resisting cultural change for reasons of nostalgia, like what we grew up with. We then sort of elevate as that is the definitive definition of my culture, is what it was like when I was growing up. And you look around, of course, and you're older and everything has changed, and you go, wait a minute, what happened? It's again part of a very complicated argument and discussion, but there is that aspect of it to the God is not willing, which I don't think has been discussed yet, but it probably doesn't need to be either. So scratch that.
No, I think that's fascinating. One of the things in history that I find really compelling is the fact that the Roman Empire, we talk about the Dark Ages, like after the Roman Empire, and a lot there. I don't know how factually correct this is, so any historians in the chat don't murder me. But basically, a lot of people say the Dark Ages are almost exaggerated because people put the Roman Empire on this pedestal, and they said, "Look how good the Romans were," and then we fell from grace. And like, there's like a conflict where people say you actually didn't lose everything. Like, it wasn't as bad as they made it sound. It was just that they were glorifying the Romans. Which, again, I don't know how true that is, but that's like one of those things that I find fascinating.
Yeah, it's certainly something that can be argued both ways. I mean, certain elements of technological knowledge was lost, like building architecture, plumbing, yeah, all these kinds of things. Concrete, for example. Roman concrete is better than our concrete.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, isn't it? So there is that aspect, I suppose. But then, there is the whole self-identifying ethos of having a golden age in our past. So in other words, a fall from grace, which kind of justifies the misery that you happen to be living in at the moment, right? So it's almost like a mythologized nostalgia.
Yeah.
And then the further back it goes, the less it adheres to reality in any respect. Yeah. And so then it becomes symbolic. And so that symbolic stuff can be pretty powerful in terms of self-identification, for sure.
Yeah. And also as a propaganda machine to get back to what was great, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm going to ask you this question. This is my like pet question here. So on your Facebook, you shared an article from The Atlantic, and it was talking about proof that possibly there was a civilization on Earth prior to what we know as humanity today. And it was basically examining what would that proof even look like, or evidence look like. How could we, quantify that someone maybe did live here before our modern age of humanity? And I would just want to ask you, do you feel like maybe there was something here on Earth before us?
Depends on what you mean. Do you mean like geological time? Are we talking 20 million years ago, or are we talking 50,000 years ago in terms of civilizations?
Let's go further back. Let's say like 20 million years.
I don't know. There are some anomalies that simply cannot be explained. So they are, and they should not be ignored. but they tend to be ignored because they don't fit the paradigm.
Hmm.
And that's not unique to archaeology. I mean, science establishes paradigms all over the place, and defends them to the death, and resists changes to those paradigms.
Yeah.
So it's not unique to Egyptology or archaeology or anything like that, but it does exist in Egyptology and archaeology and various other things. There is a dogma, and it is self-refereeing, and if you don't join the club, you don't get the grants, you don't get the permits even to excavate in places. So you got to toe that line, and that's just the nature of. There's a lot of things involved, especially with Egypt, because there's national pride that attaches ancient Egyptian architecture and art and all the rest to that concept of Egyptian self-identity. And fair enough. And of course, that would create huge resistance to the notion of a pre-Egyptian civilization, and that the Egyptian civilization simply built on top of. And you'll get that in Peru as well, with the Inca, for example,
right,
where it is patently obvious to anyone with any common sense that we have layers of Inca building on top of pre-existing Cyclopean architecture that is not Incan, right? It predates it, and it in fact, it's one of those cases of technology of building styles and methods actually deteriorates as you get closer to our present. And that's very unusual. In archaeology, there's the notion of called superposition, which is that which is lower down is older, and that which is lower down is usually more primitive than that which is higher up, because that's what's higher up is younger in the sense of closer to us.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sites, Cusco as well, but I mean sites all over, Machu Picchu as well, where you're looking at the foundational architecture and building methods are far superior to what followed. And in a broader sense, that shouldn't be surprising, because the classic example would be the Dark Ages in Europe that saw the loss of Roman style architecture and
right.
building methods. So it's not like there's no precedent for it, but it seems very clear to me that we have a precursor civilization with remnants that are still existing and are not being recognized as such. And that's kind of frustrating.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Because there's so much more mystery to uncover. Like, we're not done. We're not done as humans, literally digging up our past. So yeah, of course it's frustrating. And I think all this stuff is immensely fascinating. Especially the idea that there could be a notion or there's irregular patterns to suggest that maybe 200 million years ago or whenever, 20 million years ago, that there might have been something else, that was king of the earth, for lack of a better term.
We would not find almost any evidence of it. That's the thing, right? The slate gets wiped clean in such a way that anybody's sort of thinking, well, why aren't we finding, all kinds of things in deep strata?
Yeah.
And well, there's immense pressures. There's constant tectonic movement. There's all kinds of things going on. There's erosion. The likelihood of finding stuff is extremely low, especially technological stuff. Because quite often technology, if it's not made of stone, it is subject to deterioration over time, including, metals and all the rest. Stone's one of the few things that actually survives. So we wouldn't find it. Simple as that.
Do you think there is, in 20 million years from now, that every piece of existence of our civilization could be wiped out?
Yeah.
That's incredibly humbling, and I love it.
Yeah, we wouldn't find a thing. And not only that, I mean, the strata of our presence would be mostly hydrocarbon by that point, because the plastics would have reduced back down to hydrocarbons. So who knows? I mean, maybe the oil that we're all pumping out of the ground is what's left of a precursor civilization of 200 million years ago.
Yeah.
That produced plastic.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
I find this stuff to be fascinating. It's actually like something I would love to, like even just like the ending of ages. I think that all that stuff's really interesting. Like one of the settings that I've always wanted to tell a story in, and I'm not sure if it'll be in my next story or not, is the idea of somehow in the world in the future that we no longer have this advanced weaponry and we go back to more of a medieval approach, which I know medieval setting, it's the thing, right? But it was inspired to me by Midworld from Stephen King's Dark Tower, and the fact that you're kind of in this weird Western, almost Tolkien like air world of Midworld, but you'll see like a road sign for Iowa, and you're just like, oh, like that's the connection. And I find that fascinating to think about, like the fall of a civilization and then having to relearn these skills, relearning how to, everyone has to ride a horse. Everyone has to have a trade, right? Being a blacksmith now is a common thing again. And I don't know. I find those things fascinating. I think they're very challenging to write because there's a precedent for it in the past. So you have to do an immense amount of research to make sure that you're portraying it right. So that part is intimidating to me, but it's nice because you don't have to really reinvent the world.
No. I don't know why. Why would you find that intimidating? I mean, you don't have to perfectly copy European medievalism.
Certainly, yeah.
To recreate a medieval hierarchy and social structure. And not only that, I mean, why would you? I mean, it'd be more likely to be something a lot more closer akin to the Japanese version, where you have strongholds that are constantly warring with each other.
Yeah.
So that's a different kind of medievalism, but it still operates under sort of same loose, structural guidelines. But
yeah.
And so if you've got two great discernible variations on the medieval social structure, then there's nothing to stop you from creating a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one.
It's actually very true. How about I tell you my biggest hurdle?
Sure.
How do you get rid of all the guns, dude?
The guns?
I feel like you have to explain where all of the weaponry went, right? There's no more guns. There's no more bombs. Like they've all been. How do you explain that?
Well, rifling is a pretty advanced technology. Even if you were to sort of, not to mention producing bullets and firing caps and all the rest.
Yeah,
there's a lot of fine work that has to be sort of perfected for that kind of thing. It'd be more likely that they would go back to something like musket ball and basic powder and unrifled barrels and that kind of thing, because that's a bit more straightforward. Flint should be much more readily available than, for example, steel.
That's fair. Yeah.
So if you want to spark your musket, then you're going to use gunflint.
Yeah.
No, it's high tech. Guns are high tech.
Yeah, and that's my idea, is like de-teching the world. So, let's say this is Earth, but 10,000 years from now or 1,000 years from now. And my idea would be that the history of that event is mysterious, but I feel like I would have to explain how that happened to say this is on Earth. Where did the guns go? So like what event would have happened to get rid of all of those existing things in the world? But do you leave that up to mystery? Can you?
Yeah, you can. I mean, the idea would be once the infrastructure breaks down, once the organization breaks down, then your long routes for the trade of raw materials, minerals, ores, all the rest, that all breaks down. And then the machines that make the machines then break down because you don't have the oil or whatever. Absence of lubricants. I suppose you could render fat for that kind of stuff, but at the same time, a lot of this stuff works on fuel that's probably not hydro generated or nuclear or whatever. So you're just going to get the things that work, the things that make the machines work to make the machines will disappear.
Yeah.
And then the skill level will immediately disappear, right? Somebody who knows how to handle high-end steel presses and all the rest, why would they hang around non-functional high-end steel presses waiting for somebody fire it up, all over again? No, they're going off, finding their family and heading out into the bush. So that skill then becomes lost. And once you lose those skills, everybody's starting at scratch.
Yeah.
And,
I guess it's not so much an event, but a cascading effect of events that then lead to people having to do things that they don't go to a 9 to 5, like you said, 9 to 5, and keep shoveling coal into the oven and such and such and such. And then
nobody's going to do that when the apocalypse hits. No, they're not going to go to work.
Yeah.
And guns, bullets, ammunition, there's massive stockpiles, but that stuff's not, unless it's stored properly, it's all going to rot away. It's all going to break down and be fairly lethal in terms of, you'd be taking a big chance sticking a 100-year-old bullet into an M16 and aiming it and firing it and not getting your face blown off, right?
Well, part of my, I had thought about, like, in the story, if the people in the story find like an old military cache and it's like a relic and an art, like, what is this thing, and then like you reintroduce fire, like, oh my goodness, could you imagine the power swing that would happen then between these small like that's kind of an idea that I've rolled around with in my head. But you actually made it seem a lot more approachable, talking about like this process is breaking down and stuff. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and you tie it close to points of view of people, and they only know what they know. And you can limit that as much as you want. You as the author know a lot more. So in terms of describing things that we would all recognize, but the characters don't.
Yeah,
and that's always fun to read, for sure.
Well, the idea in my head, right, was instead of the magical sword, it's the magical Glock. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, this, like, this thing was made by elders and yada yada yada, and it's like, oh yeah, well, that I guess in this world that is magic almost, like it is.
Yeah, well, I think Mark Lawrence has done some of that, hasn't he?
Oh, has he? I actually have not read any Mark Lawrence.
Yeah, that's post-apocalyptic stuff. Terry Brooks' Shannara stuff is post-apocalyptic as well. David Brin's The Postman would be. I even like the film. I really like the film, actually. Have you seen the film?
No, I have not, but I love anything.
Kevin Costner.
I haven't seen it. I love anything post-apocalyptic, though, even if it's like trash. Like, I'll watch it. I love it.
I mean, The Postman it's a bit sort of jingoistic by the end of it, but it's a cool story. Brin's a good writer, and I liked it, and I like the fact that Tom Petty shows up in it.
Oh, well, I'm in. That sounds amazing.
That was really cool.
Postman. All right, I'm gonna watch it. I'll watch it this weekend. Pranav had a really good question in chat, and I wanted to bring it up. He said, I don't know if this was talked about previous, but is there anything unique about writing stream of consciousness versus normal prose and dialogue? The night being high, and the Healthy Dead, Healthy Dead was hilarious.
I don't remember The Night Being High and the Healthy Dead.
I don't know if I recall that.
Stream of consciousness is a different approach. It's you have to get into a very different mindset to run with it. So yeah, it is quite. It is a different thing. Yeah, you're kind of operating on not necessarily obvious points of connection, as AP would use. He loves that phrase, points of connection. But yeah, it's basically removing the obvious points of connection in a monologue or a dialogue. So they're skipping across stones that you didn't know were there, and so they're bouncing all over the place. So stream of consciousness Yeah, I think one has to sort of fall into a particular frame of mind for that, and then just run with it until it runs its course.
Hmm.
I guess, well, Virginia Woolf would be the best example of the most perfect, brilliant stream of consciousness writing. So it's a good example if people are interested in that kind of stuff,
Yeah,
as opposed to James Joyce.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. I think Ruth and Bad has your answer. The night was
Uh-oh.
high after there was a rust leaf in his handkerchief. It was from Emancipor Reese.
Emancipor Reese.
Emancipor Reese. So that is why the night was high, I guess.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't recall this.
There must have been more than rust leaf, though.
It had to be.
Yeah. Rust leaf is the Malazan equivalent of tobacco.
So just maybe a little buzz. That's it.
Yeah, no, he would be. I don't know. There had to be more in it, but it's Emancipor Reese who imbibes every known chemical in the Malazan world in order to stay sane. I don't know if you've read any of the Bocalane Corporal Roach novellas, but
I have not. I'm saving everything for like for the post 10.
Slightly different flavor. Yeah, much more serious, for example.
I will definitely be into it. I did read Night of Knives, which I enjoyed.
Yeah,
a lot.
Great book.
The atmosphere of that book is phenomenal, and also my favorite setting. Well, Darujistan's pretty sweet. Like the gas being under the city and the blue glow. I mean, one of the best settings in fantasy of all time. But there's something about Malaz City, man. I just
it's interesting. Cam is very, very good at evoking dread and atmosphere in his stuff, and I think he got a version of Malaz City that wasn't around before, in a sense, in terms of the fiction by that point. And Darushistan is also his creation. So,
well, kudos to him. I mean,
yeah.
I was just talking to this in my patron Discord the other day that Darushistan like actually might be the best setting in fantasy.
I don't know. I think Lankmar is pretty good. Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. Lankmar is pretty cool.
Well, he's not here.
No, no, unfortunately.
We had a first time reader. She just picked up the book. She loved Gardens of the Moon. She's like, I can't stop thinking about this. And Darujhistan was one of the things she pointed out. She said, it's alive. Like I can feel it. I can see it. And I'm like, yeah, that's like that rake, Tattersail. Like those are the things that pulled me in. And the thing that I've told people who get into this, and I told her this, I said, if the curiosity is driving you instead of really frustrating you, then you're in for a grand old. I think you could still graduate from frustration, right? I think that is still a viable path forward in Malazan. But if from the get-go, like I was with Gardens of the Moon, if the curiosity is getting you excited, the sky's the limit. I mean, the sky's the limit, because Memories of Ice shatters the glass ceiling of what I thought could happen in this world. I mean, it went above and beyond. And then I would say that you did that again in Bone Hunters, to be honest with you. Bone Hunters is one of the best books I've ever read. And you're right.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned Memories of Ice. If you think about it, you've got Deadhouse. Well, you got Gardens of the Moon and its climax. Deadhouse Gates kind of ups it a bit, and the Memories of Ice takes it about as far as I felt it could go, and which is why I inverted things with the fourth book. Completely, flip it, because you can't just sort of keep doubling down on these things. It's like Marvel comic movies. I mean, how do you just keep lifting that, right? There's a point where it reaches absurdity. So I had to go back the other way.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was going to be my next point. House of Change is not a soft reset, but it's a soft reset in some ways. Like you cannot go 100 miles an hour and continue at that pace. You are going to crash.
Yeah.
So you're better off throttling back down and finding your spot to ramp back up. I say this all the time. I know I keep bringing up Song of Ice and Fire, but I defend it to the death because I love it. But some people said, "Oh man, Storm of Swords is so good," and then A Feast for Crows, like he just starts meandering around and after the conflict, and I'm like, that's the point though. Like you can't just constantly have a red wedding every book. Or every scene or whatever. And also like you can't kill everybody. Like you have to keep some people alive to continue to tell the story, I think. But I thought House of Chains was like the perfect I don't even want to say a ramp down, but change of gears would probably be the
Yeah.
better way to say it. I also felt like, and you could tell me maybe I'm way off here, but like I feel like the tone of the series kind of changes around book 4. Obviously, we get a single POV, which is huge, right? Like that which I've read is your response to people saying that you can't stick with a POV, and I admire that, telling people to shove it and proving them wrong. That's been my whole life. I love that. Vengeance is a wonderful thing. I'm only kidding, but I felt like the tone kind of changed a little bit for me.
It might have.
Like I got a different aspect of Malazan. Like I thought I had it all figured out, is what I'm saying. And then like you came at me with something totally different. And then Midnight Tides felt totally different. And they're tales. Like they really are tales of the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Yeah, well, House of Chains is where I finally got to Tavor as being a central element of the story, I think. As she picks up the remnants and begins the march. So that's sort of, of all the tracks that we're running, to step into those ones by the 4th book, it was time. And then I realized that I was already on the track that would take me to the end of the series. And that was not the case in the first 3 books.
Yeah.
Because they take you in different places. And then all I needed to do was, with the 5th book, was to give us the last major setting, which is the Midnight Tides, Letheri continent. So, so in other words, if you think constantly rising action going for the first 3 books, classic trilogy setup, actually.
Yeah.
And then that quick drop off, and then it inverts for the next one, which is kind of like a breather. And then that sets you for the new thing, which is self-contained, like a little island.
It's so good.
And then once that island has been explored, then we pick up from the 4th book where we've left it at that level, and begin the ramp up again. So yeah. It's like a weird structure, I know.
It's a slight detour, but we're still, like, if you have like a plot meter, it's still moving forward, but on the road, you're kind of taking a little detour, which I liked. It's funny you said House of Chains is like a relief in some way, but I cried at the end, so I don't think that.
Well, not a relief, but it
wrecked me.
Yeah, it personal. It's everything is condensed back down to the personal,
right,
onto the field. And hopefully echoes a lot of the Iliad in the sense of the individual heroes stepping out in front of their armies and engaging to decide the battle.
Yeah.
So I wanted those aspects to sort of be there, and to make it personal.
I think you did a very good job at that. Joanna says House of Chains affected her emotionally for months. She loved the different approach.
Oh,
and
good. Great.
I
Thank you,
would
Joanna.
agree. It very much resonated with me. Like I reread things and I was just like, like someone tell me that you can't feel for these characters, because I felt every bit of those very dramatic scenes towards the end that I thought were just uncovered and unveiled, like they unfolded before me. And I'm not a very visual reader, but I feel like I visualized that scene. There's a specific one I'm thinking of, but I'll tell you after.
Yeah, sure.
You could probably guess it, but
well, no, I'm a very visual writer.
Okay.
I write in almost I guess cinematographic. Yeah, that's it. I'm tired. Anyways, yeah, I am. In a sense, I'm describing a film that's playing out in my head. So,
yeah. Well, that definitely comes through, because I thought Gardens of the Moon was pretty cinematic, and in the end of Midnight Tides, there's a specific scene with a ring and a throne room.
What, the coin rolling in?
Oh, bro. I mean, it was awesome. I want to see that. Like, if I could, if as a fan, from what I've read from the first 6, like if you could say, hey, you could adapt like one thing, I would like to see Midnight Tides on a big screen. And in fact, when I saw Dune, that was like the thing I thought of. Because so often, we get a lot of TV shows. Like it's TV shows are very hot right now. Game of Thrones happened, Wheel of Time's happened, Witcher's happened, all this stuff. And I feel like the theater became like less of an option, or people kind of forgot how amazing cinema can be.
Yeah.
and you know, Dark Tower. You know, some people like it, but critically, it was not received well. And then you have Dune, and Dune for me reminded me what the cinema is and what we can get out of that experience. And I think Midnight Tides, like when I left the theater and I was thinking about this, I said, man, Midnight Tides on the screen, that would be excellent. Like that could be big. Or thinking about Gardens of the Moon and seeing the beginnings and the Siege of Pale and the fallout from like, oh man, it's an option. Like, I don't know. I would love to see it.
Yeah. 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 My, if I were king of the world and the richest person, I mean, what I would have done was, I would have, how did I set this up? I would have signed actors for 5 years, and I would have, how did I set this up? I would have made all 10 films, released 3 a year, I guess, for 3 years. Or was it, no, was it 10 a year? I had this plan. It was this crazy plan.
I saw an AMA, you wanted 2 different directors.
Oh yeah, that's a bit more recent. Yeah, because that would get the 10 books done. Because one of the issues that we're facing now is the payoff actually to the series is in books 9 and 10, primarily, which is one giant novel. So, you know, when people are pitching, well, we'll do the first 3 seasons. We'll do Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates, and Memories of Ice. That's kind of missing the point. It's like, you know, they might be interesting and fun.
Yeah.
But so my thought was, yeah, you have 2 complete distinct productions. And so one does books 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and the other production team does 2, 4, 6, and 8, and 10. And that way, because you got some crossover characters, but you don't necessarily have a lot of it.
Yeah.
And you can certainly, where you've got, I mean, there's ways to sort of work out where people are at any one time in terms of filming. But then you'd have the entire series, and you release 2 films a year. So you're looking at, or 2 seasons if it's a television series.
Yeah.
You're looking at getting it all done in 5 years, because it seems like 5 years is like the max that people will sort of stay with something like this. Maybe 7 if you're really lucky, but generally it's 5.
Yeah.
Or usually it's 3. So it would be a bit of a, I mean, look at The Expanse. Look at the challenges it's had sort of going into its next season. And it's so good. And you're thinking,
so good.
Why not just commit to the damn thing and let's get it, you know, completely done. And then you've got it. It's part of history. It's part of legacy.
Expanse is a very interesting adaptation because sci-fi tried to rebrand itself back in the day. This is like right when The Expanse was in pilot, and sci-fi says we're going to start being serious. Like no more Sharknado. Like we're going to make some heavy hitting stuff here. Like, and it's like, okay, we'll see. And they outbid Bezos for The Expanse because Bezos apparently personally wanted The Expanse, and sci-fi was like, we're going to put all of our eggs in this basket. And they had a couple other things they bet big money on. All of them failed, but The Expanse. So they brought back Sharknado 80 or whatever it was. And Expanse just like started collecting awards, and obviously they eventually canceled it because they couldn't fulfill the budget. And Bezos was like, "Yoink, thank you." So
well, I hope that continues. I hope he stays with it. I mean, if he's personally a fan, it probably will. So and that's a good thing, because there seems to be this real, especially say with Netflix, bailing too early on stuff.
2 seasons and you're generally done. Yeah. I mean, Amazon, and this is, I don't know how true this is, but I read it online, so it must be true. Bezos apparently is a huge fan of reading fiction, and that's why he did like Man in the High Castle. Like he personally wanted these things that he enjoyed story-wise to be adapted. And Expanse is one of them, but so is Man in the High Castle. And if you look at their content, almost all of it's adaptations. Like they have The Boys, which is like a comic. I'm not familiar with it, but
it's good.
I've heard it's excellent.
It's excellent.
Invincible is now on there, so it does seem like Amazon is very much we'll adapt what we enjoy. And Wheel Time, I mean, people thought that was unadaptable for the longest time, and
Yeah, no such thing. No such thing. Everything's adaptable. I do remember now. My original plan was turn each book into a trilogy, but release 10 films a year.
That would be
so. In other words, what we've seen, especially with television, is that television has taken and stolen the best from film, right? The cinematography, the shooting methods, the spectacle, camera angles, all kinds of. It's stolen from film and brought it onto our televisions. Well, it would be nice for film to steal something back from television, and that would be the series.
Yeah.
Right. So that was sort of my original idea, was that, yeah, you'd want, premiere nights, almost once a month, where people would line up to see the next episode. And then, of course, you would have your theatrical releases, but then you could also have your extended versions, and and so basically you got 3 novels done plus the first episode of the 4th one each year, right? So 1 to 3, and then the opening of the 4th, and then you roll it into the next year, which keeps people coming back, and you do it for 3 years.
I like this idea.
It only costs billions upon billions upon billions of dollars.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because TV shows now are getting budgets. Like the or I shouldn't say Lord of the Rings, but the Tolkien show is supposedly in like $500-600 million range. And it's like, a big movie isn't that much. It's crazy. So maybe you're onto something though. Like,
well, I mean, the other thing is, whatever your output is initially in terms of sets and costumes and all the rest, you reduce costs if you stay in that world. The longer you're in the series, right?
That's so true.
The longer the tax write-offs are, whatever, right? So
those are very important when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. They love them. So you you said if you were king of the world, so do you prefer cinema over TV then?
I think it would be, I think you can get these novels into trilogies of films. But at the same time, I can easily see it going the other way as well. But I would still make use of the theater, so that you would have the television series, but you would have the opportunity for people to go and see the premiere versions of those episodes at the cinema.
Yeah.
With a few things added in, added scenes or whatever.
Yeah.
So just to sort of create a buzz that's more of a social one, where people go out for it, and then it'd be cool to push cosplay and all that kind of stuff. So for the premieres, be a lot of fun.
That would.
But like I say, it's pipe dream stuff right now.
Yeah, but it's still fun to think about, and cinema does need to do something.
It needs to do something.
Yeah. Like Dune is a paddleboard, like bringing it back to life in some ways. Did you see Dune?
Not yet.
Okay, I would love to hear your take on it, because
I was going to go this week, but I came down with a slight cold, so I'm still recovering.
I thought you were going to say it's because you had to do this, and I was going to feel bad.
No. I wanted sort of, I would go at early afternoon.
Yes,
to the IMAX. Just to reduce the crowds. It's been playing long enough now, so it should be okay. But.
Yeah, it was my first IMAX movie ever, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and man, it's the best theater experience I've had since Return. It's just silly. Yeah. It was so good. Yeah. I've been using that phrase a lot tonight. One thing, and I hear you talking about Cam, and I hear you talking about relationships between people and books and stuff. I think you're one of the very best when it comes to writing duos. 2 guys, 2 girls, whatever it might be, but 2 people, or even maybe a small. We'll expand it out to a small group of people.
No. You're right. And Cam pointed it out early on. He gets concerned over these things. He says, "Are we doing too many duos?" I think asked me that many years ago, and I said, "Well, Cam and I we'd be the only gamers. Like, I would game and run a game for him. He would turn around and run it for me. So there was just two of us. So the
Yeah.
duo dynamic, which we actually brought from our archaeology days, because we shared a tent out in the bush and whatever. So yeah, we were a duo out there. We did, you know, really stupid things out on dates. Just him and I. So that aspect sort of transferred its way across into the gaming, and from the gaming into the novels.
Wow. That was I was going to ask you if your relationship with Cam inspired your duo
Yeah,
writing.
absolutely.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Cotillion, Dancer, and Kellenbed. I mean, that was, you know, sort of the classic where I played the NPC. I played Dancer, and Cam had not called Kellenbed at the time, called Dr. Wu, who became the Emperor. And so, you know, Cam's writing that stuff right now in his Path to Ascendancy books. So that was all, yeah, that was all gained.
That's amazing to hear. That's exciting, because that is something, and Philip says Esselman is also brilliant at those duos and Malazan things. So obviously it's something that's given back to both of you when you're writing.
Well, I think we're both being nostalgic when we return to that, right? Because we're remembering our experiences gaming, and
Yeah.
you know, Fiddler and Hedge were examples. Just lots of them. Animander Lake and Lady Envy actually were a duo for a while. Never showed up in any of the books, but there's hints of it in the books.
I immediately think of Akarium and Mappo.
Yeah. Well, actually, that was fiction. That's pure fiction, that one.
I love that duo, by the way. I was sold on that. I mean, you have Pust and the Mule. I mean,
good old Pust. Yeah.
You know, we're talking about these characters, and their names change so often over the books, and it's something that you would have to be asleep while reading these somehow to not notice the name changes. What does this symbolize? Like, why the name changes in the books?
Which ones, by example?
Well, I mean, I was thinking maybe if it was just a broader thing. I didn't know if it was a broader thing, right?
Well, in some cases, it's very longevous characters, very long-lived characters, and so the perception of them may change, and so how they are identified changes. I think Sister of Cold Nights and Night Chill and that kind of stuff. That's just evolution of and contraction of names that are still, they mean the same thing. They're just different, you know, different expressions of the same thing.
Yes.
And generally, and then if somebody wants to put away their past, and they'll assume a new name.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always work, like with Strings and Fiddler. So
yeah,
not too imaginative a leap on his part, was it?
I enjoyed it. Well, it's something I noticed, and I did feel like Apsalar comes to mind. Like there's people who take on different names and their identities change, but I also did notice ones that weren't big leaps and or necessarily an identity change. So I didn't know what the driving force behind those all were, if there was just one central, or if it was for multiple reasons. Sounds like it's multiple reasons.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
I mean, that's actually one of my favorite things. I know at first I was like, can we just stick with the name? You know, I'm getting confused, but then it's almost endearing, especially whenever the person is then referred to by their old name, and like you kind of get nostalgic for the character. And I love that.
Interesting.
That's that depth that you don't get in a lot of other series. That's something Robin Hobb actually does as well. Throughout 16 books, she changes names, and specifically with Fitz. You know, I mean, he goes by, he's many different things to different people. And that is core to our human existence. We are many things to different people, right?
Yeah.
Zan had a question for you, and it says, are there stories you gamed that never made it into the books that you wished you could have fit in, or stories that you intentionally would never write?
Yeah, lots. In both cases. Yeah, there's, I mean, we're kind of limited in our energies and our time. And so there's a lot of stories that we played and had lots of fun with that may not actually translate well. And then there's other aspects that we left enough gaps for, you know, either one of us to move into if we wanted to, if we felt so inclined. And that's when Cam said he wanted to do, you know, the beginnings of the empire. It was all there for him to jump in and go with it. And as far as I know, I think his ultimate intention is to bring it all the way up to the Siege of Pale and Gardens of the Moon. So
that's thrilling.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, talk about rounding it out. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't wait.
So there you got things like Black Dog and the Mottwood campaigns of Northern Genebacus, which get referenced all through the series. And because Cam and I gamed them, so we know them well. So he's slowly working his way, I think, to that. So you'll meet the Motta regulars again and various others.
That's extraordinarily exciting. That's so exciting. I have a bit of a selfish question, I would say, and it pertains to writing in general. You're someone who's trained in short stories. What are the keys, would you say, to a quality short story? Like the secret sauce?
Focus on one thing, and then pack everything around it. I think sometimes people try to sort of fit too much in there because there can be the mistake of thinking. I mean, how many people read short stories these days? There's not that many.
Yeah.
So if your entire reading experience is novels, and then you're thinking, well, I'm going to write a short story, and then you try to fit everything that fits into a novel into a short story, it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
The form is the wrong form. So quite often what defines or separates the two is a novel allows those side quests and that leisure time to take a breather. And so it's something where you're not just doing your basic steep bell curve, right? It's doing this kind of stuff because you have to alter the pace and you have to mix things up and do that a lot in a novel. Even though you're slowly rising, to whatever final scenes you're dealing with. But with a short story, it's if you diagram it, it's got to be ching, ching, right? It's got to be one line, right? No lifts and no dips and valleys and that kind of stuff. So focus, I think, is pretty crucial, and less is more. If you can pull it off in 7 pages as opposed to 17, then you've done a good story. So,
yeah, that's solid advice. Less is more. I think in life, that's actually to be honest. That's something I was taught in my early adulthood, and it has saved me or made me save myself from embarrassment quite a few times. That's interesting. I would say my short story definitely suffers from being a novel that's a short story. I think that's a valid issue with what I wrote, to be honest.
Interesting.
I had a scene I wanted to write, and it was about a king. So it's inspired by Robert Baratheon from A Song of Ice and Fire. He kind of was past his prime, and he never got back to that. Well, mine is not so much about a person going back to their prime, but making a last stand. Of seeing the snakes in the grass, but instead of them getting to him, he starts chopping off their heads. It's something I wanted to write. And it resonated with me for many reasons. But one of the things was I just thought Robert Baratheon in his heyday sounded like a badass. And I loved the history of what happened between him and Rhaegar and all those things. I said, well, I'll try to write a character kind of like that. Not exactly. Certainly inspired by.
Have you read David Gemmell?
I started Legend this year and I need to finish it. I've heard that Gemmell writes some just tremendous stuff. One of the more
he explores that idea a lot of aging characters, aging heroes, rising up for one last stand.
I love it.
And of course, I'm sure Martin read Gemmell. There are inspirations coming from all over the place in all of our work. But Gemmell pulled that one off really well. So have fun with that.
Yeah, that'll probably be my bag. That'll be my cup of tea because I there's something about, it's like Rocky Balboa, like the movie. I was like, this franchise is still going, but man, they got me. They got me with the first Rocky Balboa when he comes back to fight the young gun. and I'm a sucker. Like a big
Mhm.
boxing match, it's like Pacquiao's back, and I'm like, he might do it. You know,
Is he really?
he finally retired. He fought a couple months back and he lost,
Yeah.
and he officially retired, and he did not look great.
No. What
No,
about Triple G? Is he still going?
you know, so Triple G, I love Triple G, and he got robbed.
My favorite boxer.
Dude, he got robbed in the Canelo. The first
Yeah,
Canelo
did
fight
he
was.
ever?
I
Yep.
swore off boxing after that, and then
Yeah.
I watched it again because I'm a coward. But I was so mad when they
So
robbed him.
cynical. It was
I'll
so
never.
cynical.
Do you remember the commentary for that fight and how atrocious
Hmm.
it was? They said, they literally said this. They say Triple G is winning when it comes to everything about boxing, but Canelo is winning the story. And I go, is this pro wrestling or is it boxing? The fix is in. I knew it.
Oh
The whole
yeah.
time.
Oh yeah. It was in all right, but
Dude,
it's because Triple G was older and Canelo was more
yes.
marketable.
That's exactly it. And then
Yeah.
they pissed around with the rematch. And then next time they fight, you know, Triple G's 2-3 years older. And then Canelo squeaks one out on him. And I'm just like, you know, I hate this sport.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you on that one. I go back and forth
I'm a
because
huge
I've
MMA
seen,
fan.
yeah, I've seen, and I used to watch Friday night fights with Teddy Atlas when he was, commentating.
Yeah.
I remember there was one fight that was fought somewhere down in Florida that Atlas was screaming at the through his microphone when the decision came in because it was so patently the opposite of what it should have been. He was spitting mad. I've never seen him so mad. It was great to watch.
You know, Paulie Malignaggi, or I always mess up his name, but he reacted that way for Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 1.
Did he?
Yeah, because he said, yeah, you know, Tyson got knocked down twice and he came back from the dead. He's like, but if you look at every single other round, like he destroyed Deontay Wilder in that first fight. It should not have been a draw, but they saw this, right? I mean, they got 3 fights out of it somehow.
They got 3 fights, yeah.
Which is, I mean, just absurd. I mean, I watched all 3 and I love Tyson Fury. I think he's so charismatic. And, you know, talking about saving the cinema, saving boxing is Tyson Fury. Canelo is also a tank. I mean, he's
suspiciously more of a tank, isn't he?
It's weird, isn't it?
You think?
A little weird.
A little weird, yeah.
It's interesting. I know people hate Floyd Mayweather a lot, but watching Floyd Mayweather like humble young boxers with just pure skill. I mean,
pure skill.
I loved watching Mayweather fight, man.
Yeah.
I mean, he's, you know, it's one of those things. It's not going to attract the bar crowd that wants, you know, blood and guts.
No, but you can imagine the frustration of the fighter fighting him because you can't hit the guy, right? You could not hit him.
No, and he's talking smack, and you know, he's talking smack the whole way up to the fight, and then he just makes you look like you've never boxed. Yeah. And these are top 1% athletes in the world.
But he never would fight Triple G, and that would have been an amazing fight.
Yeah, and he did duck Pacquiao for a while, I think.
Yeah.
You know, Pacquiao was also a little, you know, he wouldn't take a drug test and stuff. So whatever. Boxing's such bullshit. It's such bullshit. But I'm glad that you're a Triple G fan because I'm a
absolutely
Triple G fan. He's a pleasure to watch. I also like Lomachenko. He lost his last fight. I mean, he might have fought since then, but he lost against a really talented boxer from the Bronx. But I like Lomachenko, Triple G, those guys. You know, the sweet science guys. Of course, I like the bruisers, but something about like a Pernell Whitaker or those guys, man, they were just so talented. I love MMA as well. I watch MMA and books are like my 2 things. Like those are the things I really rock with. And I'm sure the 69 people watching are just like, what in the hell are these guys talking about?
All right, we're already down to 69. We should probably, what is it? 2.5 hours now, right?
Yeah, I think we can
eat supper somewhere.
Yeah, I hate to keep you on and take up more of your night or anything. This has been a pleasure, dude. I mean,
it's been a blast.
Yeah, man. I feel like I said, I felt like I had already had conversations with you and being able to ask you certain things, and I didn't even get to ask you about coincidences in life and how they play and determinism and all this stuff. So
wow, yeah, that's a whole different subject there.
I got a lot more in the chamber. So if you ever want to come back, the door is obviously open. Yeah. But yeah, what a chat. Everyone that was in chat, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I always say there's always 2 guests. I have my guest and then I have my chat. And you know, if it wasn't for all of you that spend your Friday nights with me, I'm sure that would have never came across Steve's screen. So the fact that we were able to have you on is kind of an achievement for the show, to be honest. So I want to thank you, man, for spending your time with me tonight.
It's been good fun.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, everyone,
and next time you can ask about the guitar.
The guitar, the painting. I mean, I got a lot. I got fencing questions. I literally wrote out a bunch of fencing questions. But
all right,
we'll do it again, man.
Yeah,
we'll do it again. Everyone, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Hit like and subscribe. You're subscribed, but hit like on the video. It helps people find it after the fact. I have a Patreon. It's optional, but always appreciated. And thank you. Thank you for being here. And I hope I see you again real soon. And remember to always keep turning the page.